Around the turn of the decade from the 2000s into the 2010s, Square Enix had a vision. They wanted to create a mythos in which to spawn several games and game series from. This would come to be known today as the Fabula Nova Crystallis, and although it never quite came to fruition and we only got a few games from the mythos, it still managed to spawn one of the most divisive trilogies amongst fans of the company, the Lightning Saga. Upon the release of Final Fantasy XIII, fans' hopes were high. It's the first Final Fantasy of the HD era, the first Final Fantasy on the new home console hardware, the first mainline Final Fantasy to release on an Xbox console. But it's safe to say, many fans were displeased with the state the game released in, and with the subsequent release of each direct sequel, the divide in the community only grew. The series as a whole is often looked back at by fans of Square Enix with disdain and discomfort. I, however, have not played the trilogy since I was just a little child. I don't have an opinion to hold on the game, and so it got my mind running. Having seen one too many videos talking about and criticizing Final Fantasy XIII and its sequels, I wondered if it was as flawed as people made it out to be. And just like that, I had made up my mind. I had decided I was going to play the entire Lightning Saga from start to finish to answer the question, are the criticisms fair? This is going to be either a 2 or 3 part series, depending on how long it takes with each game, but this first video will focus solely on where it all began, with the first release in the series, 2010's Final Fantasy XIII. We start off our adventure with a beautiful cutscene of a train going through the mountains while some unknown girl monologues about how the 13 days following her waking up was the beginning of the end, followed by our main protagonist Lightning and one of the supporting characters Saz going wild on some troops within said train. We then get our first look at the world we'll be exploring for the next 35 to 40 hours of playtime, and it's right and proper gorgeous. We're shown that there is some form of conflict going on between what looks like a military and regular civilians. We love riots around these parts. No time for jokes though, as we're thrust straight into a boss fight with a giant scorpion mech. I skipped the tutorial because I'm a true gamer and I don't need them. After we beat the mech, we get a look at what will be the gameplay loop for essentially 90% of our playtime, walking down a hallway, killing some enemies, and getting interrupted by cutscenes. As we make our way down the bridge, it collapses, prompting Lightning to show off some fancy gravity power. It's never really explained, and Lightning kinda just forgets that she has it for most of the game past the start anyways, so it's not important, and we're just gonna move on. Saz breaks our gravity power tech, so we're forced to fight our way to the floating equivalent of a drawbridge. Lightning and Saz discuss why each of them are here at the Hanging Edge, both being for the Post Fal'Cie, although Saz never states that until further down the line. I feel like this is a great spot to stop for a moment and explain some terms and things about the world that the game really does a piss poor job at doing so itself. FF13 does this thing, where it just starts throwing around terms and phrases as if they expect the player who's never played before to know what they mean. So to make it simple, I'll just explain it here first before things get too messy and convoluted. There are 2 worlds, Cocoon and Grand Pulse. Pulse is the larger world, and Cocoon can be described as an artificial planet the size of a moon. On both Cocoon and Pulse, there are things known as Fal'Cie. Fal'Cie are in essence mini-gods that help run the world. Although there is a difference between Pulse Fal'Cie and Cocoon Fal'Cie, Pulses being more wild and untamed, while Cocoons usually have a specific and set purpose. Cocoon doesn't like Pulse, and vice versa. These Fal'Cie have the ability to brand people with a mark, after which they will be known as a l'Cie. After becoming a l'Cie, you gain access to magic and summons, but you are also given a specific task you must complete called a focus. It's never clearly laid out to you, so you need to figure it out yourself. Should you fail to complete your focus in time, you'll become a Seath, pretty much a walking zombie monster. People who complete their focus, on the other hand, turn into crystal and are granted, quote, eternal life. You following so far? Good. Whenever someone from Cocoon comes into contact with a fal'Cie or a l'Cie from Pulse, it almost always leads to execution and or purging, which is exactly what is happening in our current circumstances. We are in the middle of a purge of an entire resort town because someone was branded as a l'Cie from a Pulse fal'Cie that was discovered nearby. So now that we have all that context that the game just assumes you know out of the way, we can get back to the current events. Lightning and Saz set off on their flying sky bridge and we are introduced to the worst character in the entire game, Snow Villiers. And let me tell you, I do not like Snow for the entire game, but I hate Snow between chapters 1 through 8. His entire personality can be boiled down to one thing. He has a hero complex. He's gonna be the big hero who saves everyone. I mean, he literally never shuts the hell up about being a hero and saving everyone. It is so goddamn annoying. Anyways, he's leading the resistance against the military, and this girl who we will come to know as Vanille sums him up the best anyone possibly could when she says,
"First impression of Snow? All talk."
Snow then valiantly claims that everyone's going home together and it's a super awesome motivational moment, and I'm sure nothing bad will happen. Snow promptly gets everyone killed. What a splendid job at leading the resistance he's doing. Anyways, directly following the bridge collapsing and everyone dying, the vestige with the fal'Cie in it is lowered down into the city. I'm not actually sure what the hanging edge is, so I'm just gonna call it a city. The Sanctum, which is Cocoon's government, makes an announcement to those being purged, stating this land is not their home, and they will totally kill them should they try to flee. Lightning and Saz make a suave escape from the flying bridge, and Snow acts like nothing just happened and he didn't get a shitload of people killed. There's more talk about him being a hero and saving everyone, and it's revealed his bride Sarah is inside the vestige. Let me tell you, the only saving grace of playing Snow in this first chapter is the little dance that LeBro does whenever she uses a potion on you. Snow and his friend hijack these flying bikes and use them to get back to the rest of the refugees, before Snow makes his way off to the vestige to hopefully rescue Sarah. These two children, named Hope and Vanille, then decide to steal the other bike to follow after Snow, since Hope would like to have a few words with him. He watched his mother die following in Snow's footsteps after all. They crash into the vestige and Vanille grabs her weapon and voila! That is the end of Chapter 1 of 13. Chapter 2 starts with us piloting Snow for a bit as he bumbles around pressing technology looking for his bride. Lightning and Saz try to find a way to open the door to the vestige, and Lightning prays to her sister to open the door. They get inside and also go looking for Sarah, who just so happens to be Lightning's sister. Now I don't have much to show for this chapter in terms of fighting, because I mostly ran past every encounter. Seeing as you don't start any character progress until Chapter 3, I didn't feel that it was a necessity to engage in battles. Hope and Vanille eventually find themselves surrounded by a bunch of Seath, and Snow comes to their rescue. They all set off together to find his bride, although Hope is rather reluctant to do so. Lightning and Saz reach Sarah first, and Saz says one of the stupidest things I've ever heard after just being told Sarah is a l'Cie.
Time to go. We have to leave before the army. What?
That's a Pulse brand. That girl's a l'Cie.
My sister.
Your sister?
She's a l'Cie.
What? A Pulse l'Cie?
Snow and the rest of the gang then show up, and Sarah has a touching moment with the two of them, and we get a glimpse of the fact that Lightning blames Snow for the fact Sarah is a l'Cie. Sarah then tells them to save Cocoon. Snow exclaims he'll protect everyone, and Sarah promptly turns into a crystal, meaning she has successfully completed her focus. Sarah then sheds a crystal tear into Snow's hand, and he has a big fit about how she's not dead and how he won't stop at anything to find a way to get her back, to which Lightning gives him a very well-deserved punch to the jaw, telling him he needs to face reality. The military then starts blasting away at the vestige in hopes to kill the Pulse fal'Cie inside. Everyone then decides to go and try to get answers and information from the fal'Cie. Lightning says fuck that and starts to attack it, which prompts it to wake up, and we get our first real boss fight, as well as my first glimpse at Square Enix's patented fuck the player design philosophy, which seems to be ever present throughout this game. You see, Square Enix decided to implement one of the worst gameplay mechanics I think I've ever seen. When a party member dies, you can just revive them, be it a Phoenix Down, the raise spell, or otherwise. But if your party leader ever should die, like I do right here, well that's game over, baby. Gotta restart the fight. It is so unbelievably stupid, and I am so glad that no other mainline Final Fantasy game has the same system. After defeating the Pulse Fal'Cie Anima, all 5 of the people who are in the room at the time are branded as Pulse l'Cie. The vestige then erupts into crystal and goes fucking nuclear, tearing down the entire city and freezing the lake underneath into crystals. We then get a flashback to day 11, which means day 11 of the 13 days leading up to the Purge, during which we get to see Snow propose to Sarah and give her a matching necklace to that which she wears. He then takes her to see the fireworks up close, which is incredibly stupid, and of course, nearly gets them both blasted in the face. The chapter ends with them embracing under the starlight and riding off. Chapter 3 starts with the gang waking up outside the vestige on the frozen, crystallized Lake Brescia. Snow, still being his insane and delusional self, exclaims that Sarah must have been the one to save them, to which Lightning was gearing up for another punch. However, she's interrupted by some stray seed. The crew discovered that they can now use magic and were introduced to the real combat mechanics, paradigms. The paradigms are bad. They're not good and I do not like them. It is not the concept that I dislike, I actually think the concept is really good. It's the execution of that concept that I dislike. So the idea is each member of your team has some roles available to them. Each role does a different thing, such as Ravager being a magic casting whilst building stagger, Commando being physical damage and stagger maintenance, Synergist being buffs, and so on. You can use these roles and customize them to make different team compositions, which in all fairness sounds fine in theory, but by the gods it's horrible in practice. To switch roles mid-combat, you have to do a paradigm shift, which wouldn't be bad except for the fact that it interrupts the combat and takes a good chunk of your time to do an animation, time in which the enemies do not stop attacking you, and therefore can most certainly kill you. It interrupts the flow of combat and is generally just a really weird design choice, and to make it worse, the party AI feels like it's brain dead sometimes. There were so many occasions where Lightning was on low HP and Vanille was on medic, and she would just sit there doing absolutely nothing for an extended period of time, way past when her ATB gauge should have been fully charged. It's a real shame because the system could have been really interesting had they just put a little more thought into the small details such as the animation locking you out of combat for a short period of time. It has a lot of potential, but it's just more tedious than it is enjoyable in its current implementation. After fighting off the Seath, everyone takes a moment to reflect on the fact that they're l'Cie now. Hope gets mad at Snow for not being able to save his mom, to which Snow is completely oblivious to said fact. Hope then blames Sarah for everything that's happening and generally just acts like a whiny little baby here. Everyone decides to just kinda get up and start walking, following behind Vanille's overly bubbly personality. After some time, everyone stops to discuss what they think their focus is. Saz explains how a focus works, and everyone looks at him like he's the most suspicious man under the sun. Then another incredibly stupid interaction with Saz happens, where Hope says two incomplete thoughts about what he saw during his vision, and Saz declares that everyone's focus must be the same thing, without anyone else in the party ever stating what they saw. Somehow Saz just knew that everyone had the same dream. They discuss what they think it means, and Snow butts in saying it must be to protect Cocoon, his reasoning being that Sarah said so. He runs off to go find her, and the team follows suit. We then get to hear the reasoning on why Snow thinks their focus is to protect Cocoon, that being that Sarah had said it right before she turned into Crystal, and since their Fal'Cie was the same as hers, it must mean that their focuses are connected. The military shows up and we get another cutscene of Lightning doing badass stuff. Vanille throws up some gang signs after promptly killing the soldiers, and Lightning says we gotta watch out for their elite military group. Vanille, being best character again, decides the best course of action is to just run away from their problems. Saz laments about kids being made l'Cie, and Snow says not to worry cause he'll protect them. Saz says he can't do that cause he is a kid, which is 100% true, and everyone just kinda mopes around some more. There's a lot of just standing around and moping in this chapter. The party carries on for a bit more before finally stumbling upon the crystallized Sarah, which How convenient. That lake seemed pretty fucking huge, and they just managed to find her very shortly after waking up. Snow tries to dig Sarah out, and Lightning decides they need to move on. Snow is still being delusional, saying shit like he'll protect everyone and no one will die, the usual spiel. This of course pisses Lightning off, and she goes off on him. I mean, just watch this.
Does she look protected to you?
I can save her!
What can you possibly do?
God, it's satisfying seeing Snow get punched. Unfortunately, before Lightning could wail on him some more, they're interrupted by the still alive but really beaten up Scorpion robot from the first chapter that Saz and Lightning fought. Snow decides that he wants to stay behind to try to dig out Sarah, while the rest take off with Lightning. After trekking in one direction for quite a long time, we see the military is being deployed in large force to catch stragglers. Lightning says we gotta skedaddle quickly, so we continue our long walk down a corridor. Now, whilst you're exploring the maps, characters will often have conversations with each other. Usually, it is a welcome distraction from the tedium that is the core gameplay loop. Sometimes, however, you will get moments like this.
We really have to go this way? I'm too old for this. I may be able to see, but I ain't getting any younger. Oh, how high is this thing? I don't think I'm gonna make it. Here's catching.
4 times in the span of a minute did Saz say something about his age. It's overkill, and it is so goddamn annoying. Eventually, we find ourselves in a large set of ruins that I guess was just like chilling under the lake. It's never properly explained, but that's not important. We run through the ruins all the way to the end, and Vanille summons forth a very mediocre boss for us to kill, after which we find ourselves an airship as well as our ticket out of here. We cut back to Snow, who has been found by the army by this point, and during the ensuing conflict, he summons forth an Eidolon, that being Shiva, who in this game is 2 very hot blue girls. The idea of summoning fights in this game is simple. You just do what they want. For example, they want Snow to be on the Sentinel roll and get beaten up, so you just be on the Sentinel roll until the gauge above their head fills and you win. After Snow beats them, they turn into a fucking motorcycle. Which is like so unbelievably silly, but badass at the same fucking time. Snow ultimately gets taken in by the military though, and we are treated to another really nice cutscene of Saz flying and fending off military ships, during which Primarch Daisley, basically the Prime Minister of this world, is giving an announcement that the purge was successful and everyone was peacefully relocated. We are then shot out of the sky and wake up in a giant pulse scrap heap from a war fought a long time ago. The gang splits up here, with Hope and Lightning going one way, and Vanille and Saz going a different, and thus ends Chapter 3. Chapter 4 starts with us piloting Saz and Vanille, the road Lightning and Hope took now being blocked off. We get a flashback to Vanille on day 11 throwing up gang signs while making a wish on some fireworks. We also get to see Lightning as her lieutenant states he's putting her up for promotion. We then cut back to Lightning with Hope finally catching up to her. We get more of the usual here. Running and fighting, and running and fighting. Chapter 4 is by far my second least favorite, because most of what happens during it seems entirely pointless and annoying. It's just walking, interrupted by pointless cutscenes every 5 minutes of people splitting up, coming together, or arguing about their circumstances. It's very, very tedious, and I hated my entire hour I spent in this chapter. We then get another flashback, this time to day 13, during which we see Lightning quit her job as a soldier and volunteer to be purged, knowing now that she had joined to try and save Sarah. Lightning then gives Hope a quote that sticks with him for the rest of the game. Hope is too tired, and so Lightning decides to leave without him. We cut back to Saz and Vanille, who have decided to take the opposite path. Saz and Vanille eventually meet back up with Hope, and together they carry on to go find Lightning. Saz gives a brief rundown of the war with Pulse, and how this place was built using junk from the Pulse machines, and we get our first glimpse that something might not be right with Vanille here. Eventually, the gang catches up and joins forces with Lightning. We are then treated to a pretty neat boss fight with one of the cooler and more memorable enemies from FF13. Eventually, we find ourselves at a crossroads to which the gang has yet another disagreement. Lightning decides she wants to go and take on the entire government and raise some hell. Saz wants to, not do that. So Saz and Vanille take the approach of running away from their problems, whilst Hope and Lightning decide to take the fight to Eden, essentially the head honcho of the Cocoon Fal'Cie. Now piloting the Lightning and Hope duo, which, by the way, is probably the best duo in the game. I love their dynamic. We set off towards Palom Polum to hitch a ride up to Eden. I then get treated to another taste of the party leader dying game over mechanic, which just makes me hate the combat even more. Lightning and Hope take a break and we flip on over to Saz and Vanille. Hi, hello, it's me from the future. I'm jumping in here because I forgot to write this in my script and didn't realize it when I went and recorded all my audio for this video, but Lightning has her Eidolon summoning here, and I just completely skipped over it, so yeah, make note of that. Saz and Vanille decide that they're gonna go to Nautilus, which is essentially one giant amusement park, a la the Golden Saucer. They find their way to a cliffside and decide to call it a night, and we get a glimpse through Vanille's super happy, always cheery persona here when she starts crying during her sleep. We then cut to Snow, who is being transported on the Lindblom, a very large airship, as he meets up with the head of the cavalry, one of the Guardian Corps' military units, Cid Raines. Cid informs Snow of the Sanctum's plan to publicly execute the l'Cie, and asks for Snow's assistance in finding the others, hoping that he can use them to take Cocoon back from the l'Cie and put it in the hands of the people. We are then given a quick playable flashback of Sarah breaking up with Snow when she first reveals to him that she is a l'Cie, and Snow says that it's okay, she'll be fine and he'll protect her. Thus ends Chapter 4, and I say, good fucking riddance. Chapters 5 and 6 both focus on a different pair that came out from Chapter 4, that being Lightning and Hope and Vanille and Saz. Chapter 5 is one of my favorites. I know a lot of people dog on Chapter 5 since it is one of the worst offenders when it comes to just being a long hallway, but at least it's pretty. The chapter starts with Hope, who is starting to show some development, no longer being a whiny baby, deciding to take charge. You run for some time and eventually Lightning gifts Hope her dagger, which is a very sentimental item to her, being a gift from Sarah on her birthday 2 days prior to the Purge. Hope and Lightning take a moment to hide from some soldiers before realizing they aren't even on the lookout for them. They now understand that SciComm has kept the other branches of the military completely uninformed of their failures in chapters 1 through 3. We find ourselves at a giant gate-like thing and Hope starts to wonder how the rest are doing. They talk about whether or not Snow is alive and Lightning exclaims that he's too stubborn to die, before really laying into him here. We descend to the lower half of the Gapra Whitewood where the animals being experimented on are located, and we trip a security alarm. Knowing soldiers will be on our tails, we book it. Lightning can tell that something's bothering Hope and infers it's gotta do with Snow. Hope explains to Lightning how his mother was killed because of Snow, and how he blames him for everything that's happened with Sarah, the l'Cie, his mother dying, etc. And says Snow's gotta pay for it. Hope asks Lightning if he could use a sword, of course she says hell no, and we get a flashback to when Sarah and Snow tell Lightning on her fucking birthday she both became a l'Cie and is getting married to Snow. What a horrible time to do that. Lightning, of course, is very much not having any of it. Snow still blabbering, even in the past, about protecting her. Lightning then watches the announcement that a Pulse Fal'Cie has been found in the vestige, and finally believes her sister. We cut back to reality and continue our journey. Finding a bunch of dead soldiers, Lightning tells Hope to stop having empathy and sympathy and shit or he'll never survive. To which Hope cooks up this incredibly stupid plot point that he calls Operation Nora, the ultimate goal of which is exacting revenge on Snow. Lightning points out Snow wasn't the one who actually killed his mom, it was the Sanctum, and she is half right. They wouldn't have been there if it weren't for the Sanctum, but also Snow is definitely partially to blame. We finally reach the end of the Gapra Whitewood and fight this big Bulbasaur wannabe, and Hope, I guess just on the fly, decides that this is the first phase of Operation Nora. We leave the Whitewood and set our eyes upon Palom Polum. We then cut to Snow talking with a lady named Fang, who will become our ultimate party member down the line, followed by a flashback to the day that the army found out Sarah was a l'Cie. Snow takes her to the vestige and then immediately regrets it after it sucks her up inside and takes her hostage. He then crash lands on the beach at like fucking 100 miles per hour and is totally fine, not even a scratch on him. Thus ends, however, Chapter 5. Chapter 6 is extraordinarily short, almost as short as Chapters 1 and 2. We pilot Saz and Vanille through the sunlit waterscape, Vanille being her usual overly energetic bubbly self, and Saz being in a sort of unsure depressive state. They hide from some ships passing overhead, after which Vanille is all like, let's run, the other direction of trouble, and off to Nautilus they go. After walking for some time, we get a cutscene where Vanille is trying to learn more about Saz, which gets to the topic of children. We then get a flashback to day 11, this time from Saz's perspective. We see Saz's son wish that Saz would become cheerful again like he used to be. It's our first hint that something is eating away at him about his son, but we won't learn more until later. We then get a tutorial stating that we don't have to take every battle that we see. I promptly ignore this and pick a battle that I cannot win. I of course got myself killed. Deciding the game probably knows best, I then avoid almost every battle from here on to the end of the chapter. The two stop for a short break again, this time to catch up on a little sleep. Vanille wakes up to see Saz standing by a lake, so she goes to talk with him. This is where Saz reveals to Vanille that Dodge was picked by a Sanctum Fal'Cie at Uriday Gorge. During the flashback cutscene, we see that Vanille actually already knew all of this and was present at the gorge when Dodge was chosen to be a l'Cie. We hear how Saz blames the two Pulse l'Cie that snuck in for his son being chosen, thinking that the Sanctum Fal'Cie chose Dodge to protect itself against them, pretty much telling Vanille he blames her whilst being completely unaware of the fact that it was her. It's then also revealed that Dodge can sense Pulse presence, which is how he discovered the Fal'Cie inside of the vestige at Bodum. We then hear Saz lament about the fact that he only got on the train to be purged to kill the Fal'Cie, thinking that would maybe complete Dodge's focus. However, he's unsure that even is his focus, and throws out the idea that maybe his real focus is for the l'Cie to die, in which case he'd have to kill himself, but the tiny little chocobo says he can't, so he doesn't. All around, I like this a lot. It's a real moral dilemma that Saz has been thrown into, and there's a lot of drama with Vanille that he's completely unaware of right now. At the end of the chapter now, we get a pretty neat boss fight with the snazziest fucking tunes I've ever heard. I mean, listen to this boss theme. If there's one thing that Final Fantasy XIII does great, it's the fucking music, man, I swear. They then find themselves waiting for the boat to Nautilus. Saz complains some more about their current predicament, saying all this really happened because Dodge sensed the Pulse Fal'Cie, and Vanille interrupts him saying not to blame Dodge, to which Saz replies that she's right and it's actually those two Pulse l'Cie who are at the gorge, still unaware that it was Vanille, and this is where Chapter 6 comes to its close. Chapter 7 is where the game starts to pick up, story threads start coming together, and things start to actually happen. On the downside of that, however, this is where the chapters start becoming way longer. The chapter starts with the military mobilizing upon the town of Palampolum, whilst Roche, I'm not exactly sure how you say his name, the director of SciComm, gives a speech to the general populace about the terrors of Pulse and what have you, and it actually seems as though he really believes that Pulse l'Cie are all by default evil and threaten the way of life as we know it. We're then shown Lightning and Hope sneaking in. Hope points out some tunnels they can use, and we're back to playing the game. We get a short cutscene in the tunnels talking more about the Fal'Cie as we get a glimpse of the Sanctum Fal'Cie Carbuncle in charge of food production. Lightning talks about how humans are leeches to the Fal'Cie, and Hope says that we're more like pets. This prompts Lightning to have a very strange epiphany that, oh yeah, I guess you're right, without someone to serve, my life was meaningless. She then uses a whole lot of words to say a whole lot of nothing about how she was fighting because it made everything else around her disappear, and how Hope got swept up along with her, and how it's all been a big mistake and shit. She then declares that Operation Nora is cancelled, and practically spits in the face of her entire character and the person that she has been up to this point. Now look, I can understand what the writers were going for here, wanting to have Lightning come to terms with the fact that she's been running away from her problems this whole time and not actually really ever facing them, but this was just the worst way to do it. It throws away everything that Lightning has embodied as a character up to this point, and it comes out of left fucking field. I hate it so much. Her entire character flips on a dime here. Like, she even said back in chapter 4 that she doesn't serve the fal'Cie, like verbatim.
I don't take orders from fal'Cie. How I live is up to me.
It wouldn't be nearly as bad if Lightning had shown any hint of this change coming within the last 7 chapters, but she hasn't. She has been completely steadfast in her beliefs, which is why I think this is just one of the worst character moments in the entire game. Hope, of course, then asks Lightning, what do they do now that Operation Nora has been cancelled? And Lightning says she does not know, but they cannot lose hope. Lightning then talks about how she changed her name with the idea that it would make her stronger, and Hope cries some more about how Snow killed his mom and how angry he is at him. Lightning implores Hope to speak with his dad whilst they're here in Palumpolum. After reaching the surface, they realize they've been found and surrounded by the military. Lightning tells Hope he should run and that she'll keep them busy. I don't know how she's gonna keep an entire fucking army busy, but when all hope looks like it's lost, Snow and his compatriots arrive to save the day. We get treated to a damn sexy cutscene of Snow and Fang riding around on Shiva shooting people, followed directly by playing as Snow for the first time since chapter 3, and boy does it suck just as much as I remember. Of course, Snow, 7 chapters into the story, a full 14 hours in of gameplay, is still saying the same shit about being the hero. We are then forced to play as the worst duo pairing the story has given us yet, Snow and Hope. They're both 2 of the most annoying characters personality-wise, and they suck to play together as a party. Everything they fight feels as though it takes a fucking year to kill, and their section during this chapter is by far the longest, which makes it all the more painful to experience. We get another scene of Snow being absolutely blind and oblivious to the hate Hope has for him, and unwittingly making it worse by saying the most out-of-touch and stupid things possible. Saying shit like, "It's stupid to fight if you get killed." Practically saying to Hope's face his mom was a dumbass. Like, just look at this scene.
The army's no match for Nora, right?
He was smiling.
How the hell is Snow still so damn unaware? Hope was straight up staring daggers into his soul. Snow and Lightning set a rendezvous point, that being Hope's house, and the military decides to get rid of all fire zone restrictions, meaning fuck civilians who are in the way. Snow says that there's hope that Sarah will turn back from being Crystal, and Lightning tries to warn him that Hope plans to fucking kill him. However, the line gets cut off before she can. We then switch over to operating Fang and Lightning, one of the best pairings so far. As we progress, Lightning notices that Fang has the marking of a l'Cie, though it looks different than the others. Fang explains that she's a Pulse l'Cie like everyone else, but she isn't from Cocoon. She's a Pulse l'Cie who actually came from Grand Pulse. She explains that she had completed her focus and her partner and herself had turned into Crystal. Then when they woke up, they were on Cocoon. She then proceeds to casually drop a, albeit very obvious, bombshell that Vanille was her partner and is also from Grand Pulse. We cut to Hope and Snow spying on some soldiers, leading civilians to safety. Snow states that they'll be purged since they were in contact with l'Cie, and says they need to do something to save them. He keeps on doing his spiel about protecting everyone, which is, just pissing Hope off more and more. We stumble and fumble our way into a crowd of people, and Snow causes a big ol' commotion to try and scare everyone off so that no civilians get in the way of the fighting. We run down an alley just to find that the people we scared off have come back with all manner of random items to try and fight us. Snow uses a billboard to block their way, and Hope returns a stuffed animal to a small girl, showing that they aren't actually all that bad. We then use a jetpack of one of the flying guys to get onto the roofs away from the angry mob. Snow implores Hope to go visit his father and talk some more about protecting Cocoon and yada yada, the usual spiel. The military then shoot down this floating billboard for seemingly no reason. Like, no one was on it, and there wasn't even anyone nearby, they just kinda shot it down.
LSC's only hope is a quick death.
We then get a taste of the worst fucking enemy thus far, this flying bike motherfucker that for some reason they thought was a good idea to give a skill that can one-shot kill party members. I mean, just watch this. Eventually, Hope finally gathers the courage to try and confront Snow, asking how Snow would feel if his family was taken from him and he couldn't take them back. Asking what if he knew who was to blame, Snow replies that, there'd be trouble. And Snow can finally tell that, hey, maybe something is bothering Hope. Asking if he's okay, but before they could continue, they're interrupted for a boss fight. After the boss, Snow and Hope move to a different spot to take a break from the fighting. Hope gets a flashback of his mother and finally loses it. He starts laying into Snow about everything, and the faces and sounds Snow makes here just crack me the fuck up. It's like his whole world just at once started coming down around him, and I love it.
And what if that gets people around you involved?
What?
What happens when your actions end up ruining someone's life? What then, Snow? How do you pay for what you've done?
I can't!
I actually really like this scene. Snow finally being confronted with the hypocrisy in his idea that a hero has to try and protect everyone, and the fact that his actions have done more harm than they have good, getting more and more people involved each time, is honestly really good. Snow doesn't know how to fix his problems that he creates, so he just decides to smile and run away from them as if they don't exist, and he's the good guy, and in turn hurts those around him, just like how he brought Hope's mom into danger. Hope eventually exclaims that Snow deserves the same fate as those he gets killed and knocks him off the edge. Snow finally realizes that he got Hope's mom killed all the way back in Chapter 1. But just as Hope goes to finish him off, a gunship starts blasting missiles at them, and Snow takes a plunge, grabbing Hope and using his own body as a shield from the impact as they fall to the ground. We then cut to a flashback at Uriday Gorge and see Fang send Vanille off by herself while she distracts the guards. Fang says that the Fal'Cie chose Sarah because her and Vanille didn't do their job properly, to which Lightning brings out the good old trusty slap. The two of them continue on towards Hope's house. Lightning and Fang talk a little bit about Pulse, and Fang laments about the fact that she must have completed her focus at one point, but she can't remember it at all. She then states that she doesn't care about Pulse or Cocoon, she just wants to keep Vanille safe. She then shows Lightning how to tell how much time you have left before turning into a Seath. They see the explosion that blasts Snow and Hope off the ledge, and decide, hey, we should probably pick up the pace. Snow grabs the unconscious Hope and starts carrying him off to his house. Dude even climbs up a whole ass ladder with Hope dangling over his back. Hope finally wakes up and Snow gives this whole speech about not being able to change the past and what's happened, but wanting to be given a chance to make things right, which works enough to make Hope stop hating his guts for the time being. The boss from before then shows back up and absolutely tosses Snow to the side. You have to fight as Hope for a bit until Lightning and Fang finally show up and join the party. They grab Snow and together depart, finally arriving at Hope's house, to which he informs his father of his mother's death, and they have a nice father-son bonding moment together. Snow then apologizes to Hope's dad for, getting his wife killed, and then still blabbers on about saving everyone and being the hero. Everyone then starts to discuss their plan of action, and while doing so are ambushed by the military. We quickly fight our way out of the house, and Snow tries to reason with the troops, walking out to show everyone that he's just a human and no different than anyone else, which gets the troops all riled up, not sure what to do. Director Roche now properly introduces himself, acknowledging that he understands that this is their home, but states that their mere existence disturbs the lives of millions of residents on Cocoon. Snow then points out he's full of shit, saying that if he wants to kill LaCie, then he should just kill LaCie. Why purge every citizen that comes into any amount of contact with Pulse? Just then, however, Roche is ambushed and his troops are put down. As the chapter draws to its close, we get one of the coolest and most enjoyable boss fights the game has to offer, the Sky Tank. It starts out with a lot of firepower, however you can slowly kill each weapon, making it more and more vulnerable. Honestly, it's really fucking cool. After taking down the Sky Tank, the cavalry swoops in to rescue our party. We all depart from Hope's father's residence, and we swap on over to Saz and Vanille, thus ending Chapter 7. Chapter 8, following the same pattern as the other Saz and Vanille portions, is also very short, which again, I do not mind, certainly less so after spending 4 fucking hours running around one city in Chapter 7. There's honestly not a lot going on in the first part of this chapter, it's very second half loaded. You spend most of the first 30 minutes just running around Nautilus, taking in the sights and attending parades and shit. Eventually we go to look at some chocobos, and Saz says that he is going to turn himself in. Vanille says he can't do that because she knows who the Pulse Lassie responsible for Dodge becoming a Lassie is. But before she can say, they're promptly interrupted by the military firing upon them. After fighting our way through Nautilus, we fight this big tank monster thing, and Saz is reunited with his son, who promptly turns to Crystal, having completed whatever his focus was. As stated in the Chapter 6 section, Dodge can sense Pulse presence, and thus the military used him to find Saz and Vanille. Nabat, who I guess is the leader of PSICOM, I can't exactly remember her position, shows footage from Uriday Gorge, which clearly shows the fact Vanille and Fanged were the ones who woke up the Fal'Cie and are technically responsible for Dodge becoming a Lassie. Vanille runs away and Nabat does some emotional manipulation shit, and Saz follows after to kill her. There's then a weird, I guess, like dreamlike sequence thing where there's a fake Saz confronting Vanille about the fact that she lies to use people for protection. He says if she's tired of living with the guilt, then she should die with it. She implores Saz to shoot her, and Saz says it's not good enough, and Vanille has a real emotional breakdown, unsure of what to do. Saz says there's really no reason for him to continue living, and summons forth his Eidolon. Vanille, however, steps in the way to protect him. Saz gets up off his ass and joins her, challenging his summon to a battle. We, of course, beat the man and turn his ass into a go-kart. After the battle, Saz decides to let Vanille go and seemingly shoots himself in the head, ending the chapter with them bringing Vanille and what seems to be a dead Saz to be imprisoned. Chapter 9 is another really long one, taking place on the Palamecia, the flagship for the Sanctum Fleet. Sid Raines and co can tell that we're being tempted into a trap to rescue Saz and Vanille, and we decide the best course of action is to just go balls to the walls all in. Unnamed soldier man with luscious hair flies us into the Palamecia, and we are immediately detected and thrown into action. We jump out onto what I think is a docking zone. If so, it's gotta be the world's worst designed dock system. You know how easily someone could fall off this shit? This is definitely not up to OSHA standards. We cut to our locked away compatriots and get to see what happened after Saz seemingly shot himself, having not actually done so. Nabat knocks his ass out after antagonizing him. Saz and Vanille make up, and we get a flashback to day 1 where Vanille and Fang wake up. Vanille states that she had remembered everything, while her partner Fang didn't remember anything. We switch from a code red to a code green. Whatever that means, they kinda start throwing codes out willy-nilly here. Saz and Vanille then make their daring escape, and Saz says that we aren't running from our problems this time. We are then put in charge of Saz and Vanille, with yet again some of the funkiest tunes this game has to offer. We flip from a code green to a code purple, and Saz declares that we shall go get ourselves rescued. After fighting our way through some more, we get to see Nabat freaking out about a million different code colors before Primarch Daisley is all like, Code White, trying to be menacing, but failing miserably since we have no fucking clue what Code White means. Whilst Saz and Vanille fight their way through the engine room, the rest of the gang finds themselves outside, like, on the wing of the ship or something. They release a bunch of random monsters that I guess they just had stored inside of the ship. We are treated to one of the easiest boss fights in the game, dying quicker than most of the normal encounters, after which Vanille and Saz just kinda blow up the wall and waddle on out. The boss monster comes back with a vengeance, though it does it no favors as it dies equally as quick this time around. Fang inspects Vanille's branding, making sure she still has time. The party then fills in the two on what the plan is, that being taking down the Sanctum. Also, I wasn't sure when to mention it, and it's not a huge issue, but they have this weird auto blur feature that's supposed to like blur out the background during these cutscenes. But a good majority of the time we wind up in a situation like this where the characters in the foreground accidentally go blurry. It's not game breaking, it's just like a weird minor tech issue that gets on my nerves and takes me out of the story. More of the flying monsters we just killed show up and Fang just, I guess, decides to start being a badass now. I don't know why she didn't just do this one-shot kill Dragoon jump thing from the start, but it's whatever I suppose. We all proceed to hop on its back and Saz gets absolutely shafted with the seating. We blast our way right into the hallway directly preceding the main deck. Now that the team is finally all together, we have the option to change our party. I, of course, take this opportunity to switch the party to be nothing but cute girls, because I am a gamer. Now, right before I started the final boss fight of this chapter, I noticed yet another minor gripe that pissed me off. When you run in this game, for some reason, you don't just run straight, you run at an angle. So if you just hold down the forwards button, you start drifting to the left or the right. Anyways, we make our way into the main deck throne room thing, and a bot hops her happy ass down, all too eager to fight us. Primarch Daisley then tells her to fuck off and starts blasting everyone on the main deck with his magical balls. Daisley declares that Cocoon is just a factory to mass produce humans to be used by the fal'Cie. He declares, without the fal'Cie, everyone is hopeless, and then reveals he's not actually a human, nor a l'Cie, but rather he is Bartandalus, Lord Sovereign of the Sanctum fal'Cie. This boss fight I dislike a lot. It's not necessarily hard or complicated, but Jesus fucking Christ if it isn't long. I remember the first time I ever did this fight on the PS3, it took me 20 damn minutes. This time it took me a total of 13 minutes, so not nearly as long, but still lengthy as fuck. After beating him, he explains to us that to properly put down the fal'Cie, we have to do something called Ragnarok. He then clearly lays out our focus to us, that being one of us needs to become Ragnarok and kill a fal'Cie named Orphan. Orphan being kinda like a fuel source for another fal'Cie, Eden, who is the fal'Cie that provides for pretty much everyone on Cocoon. No goes on again about how our focus must be to protect Cocoon because that's what Sarah said before turning into Crystal. Daisley is all like, nah, you're a dumbass, her focus was to bring you guys together so that you can be made into l'Cie to destroy Cocoon. Daisley then straight up fucking crashes the flagship whilst providing us a way to escape. Roche, the asshole from Chapter 7, who is still somehow alive after being shot, chases us down and tries to blast our ass out of the sky. We fly to Eden and I'm almost given fuel to make a 9/11 joke, before teleporting away, thus ending the chapter. Chapter 10 starts and the gang is caught up inside of a New York subway station. Vanille exclaims that it looks something like from Pulse. Everyone takes a moment to reflect upon what Bartandalus told us, that being our focus to destroy Cocoon. Everyone decides this is too much brain power to be expending, and we start walking looking for a way out. Snow is standing around sulking about how he was wrong and his focus isn't to protect Cocoon. Lightning does her best to cheer him up. Our presence here wakes up some old Pulse technology, and Fang and Vanille explain that this place must be an Ark. Basically a Pulse arms depot used to train l'Cie to become stronger. The 5th Ark is one of the most hated areas in the entire game. And for good reason. It's basically a 2-hour long hallway with nothing important going on almost the entire time. I, however, am a master of the art that is running past enemies and avoiding fights, which makes this chapter pretty trivial. After having run in a straight line for like 30 minutes or so, we find ourselves at the halfway point. Sid Raines somehow magically found us and was just chillin' waiting around for us to show up. Raines reveals he is actually a Sanctum l'Cie. His focus is a little unclear, but it's something to do with setting us on our path to destroy Cocoon. He basically explains to us that the fal'Cie are big babies who miss their mommy, someone called the Maker, and they can only get them back should Cocoon be destroyed. Sid decides that he wants to go against his focus and stand in the way of the l'Cie, which makes sense, he's in a way trying to save everyone, but it turns him Seath, and we get a pretty cool boss fight, though he is extremely annoyingly designed. He has some of the nastiest combos that if I was even slightly weaker, could probably kill me from max HP. After Sid is defeated, he actually turns to Crystal, which If his focus is what he said it is, to assist us in destroying Cocoon, then, it shouldn't have turned into crystal, right? It goes against the rules established about this world in crystal stasis. The whole crystallizing concept is really poorly explained and fleshed out, so I'll just say that the leading theory is Bartandalus turned him into crystal because he needs him alive for later. We continue on our warpath through the 5th arc, walking down literally the exact same copy-pasted corridor for an excessive amount of time. However, we eventually find our way to the end. Snow gives a nice motivational speech about doing what Sarah and Rains want and protecting Cocoon, to which Fang says, "Count me the hell out." She pretty much says that she's gonna go smash up Cocoon and whatnot because it's a really shitty place, and she isn't wrong. In the process, however, she summons her Eidolon Bahamut, who kicks my ass a few times. Having tamed the summon, however, we walk along the path that magically showed up, which leads us straight to an airship. Ooh, how convenient for us. We all decide to board on and head down to Pulse to try to figure out what to do next and try to defy our focus. We're then treated to an absolute gem of a cutscene when our airship is smacked out of the sky by an air centipede. It's got some of the best dialogue yet and some of the best character writing yet.
You okay?
Oh yeah, I'm great.
Grab on!
Home sweet home. Welcome to Grand Pulse.
With that, however, Chapter 10 has ended. Honestly, it is one of the worst. It's long, boring corridors copy-pasted over and over, interrupted once by Rains for some story events, and once more at the end for a summoning battle. I can understand why people hate it. We're starting to get close to the end here with Chapter 11, as we get an introduction to Pulse being a wild, uncaring land, basically the Australian outback. We then get into immediate action as Hope's branding is going off and he's about to summon his Eidolon. However, he's off on his own, so we gotta rush to go find him. We catch up and find Hope, but he's passed out. When he wakes up, he tells the party we should go to Erebo, which he for some reason knows exists without having ever been there before. He tells everyone to go without him because he'll hold us all back, but they assure him he's fine. He gets upset and worried that his weakness will get someone hurt, and then properly summons his Eidolon, that being Alexander. And if you thought Bahamut was a tough one like I did, man, Alexander is a whole nother beast. I died, and died, and died, and died again. Don't worry though, because I eventually got his ass, and from here we're finally let into the open world. Open in quotations, however, because there's not a whole lot to do. You can hunt some monsters and ride some chocobos, but that's about it. I take this opportunity to go farm up some CP from this spot where 2 large strong monsters are, although I don't have any footage save for this failed attempt after Vanille gained too many ATB segments. From here we set off down this tunnel system being dug out by one of the Pulse Fal'Cie and decide we should hitch a ride on him. Fang reveals that she now remembers what happened all those years ago, that being, she had turned into Ragnarok and left a scar on Cocoon. She confronts Vanille about why she would lie to her about it, and during which, Vanille winds up summoning her Eidolon, Hecatoncheir. After beating Vanille's summon, Fang and Vanille make up and we set back on the road. Hope eventually falls right in the path of the Fal'Cie and does some fucking Attack on Titan, Aaron founding Titan shit and commands all of the Juggernauts to stop the Fal'Cie. After doing so, we all board it and ride off to the water area. We get a flashback of Sarah talking with Vanille at Bodum on the 9th day, and we learn that Sarah was the one who gave Vanille the idea of just running away from your problems. Vanille has like a breakdown on the beach around someone who is practically a complete stranger to her, and I can only imagine how awkward this must have been for Sarah. We also learn that Vanille blames herself for Sarah being a l'Cie, and says that she thinks Bartandalus is lying and that Sarah actually did the right thing. Snow gives the most unenthused response ever, saying, yeah, he knows. We then get a scene where Lightning and Snow talk for a bit, and she tells him not to let Sarah down after they get married. Snow starts doubting that they'll get to see her again, and Lightning tells him not to worry about it and that there's no room for doubt. It's honestly a really nice scene, showing how the two have come to actually like each other now. A far cry from the start of the game, when Lightning couldn't for the fucking life of her stop punching him. Eventually, we arrive at this tower a Fal'Cie has made into its nest. And God, let me tell you, this place makes the 5th arc look like heaven. Basically, the idea is that you need to do side missions for these talking statue guys to rotate the walls so that the elevators can function properly. And every time you go up a set of main floors, they cut a bit of the fal'Cie off. There's nothing really story relevant that happens here, but goddamn, it's like an hour of just running between the same 3 rooms to fight slightly stronger normal mobs just to progress. It sucks. Eventually we reach the top of the tower and we do battle with the fal'Cie, and this sucker is one of the most badass bosses yet. They really stepped it up in the latter half when it comes to boss designs. After we beat him, we look off into the distance, seeing that Erba has become a desolate desert landscape. You descend into the city and there's some minor side activities that you can do. I choose to skip over them because I'm starting to get more and more frustrated with the game and I just want it to be over. Eventually we run into Sarah, who starts talking all crazy and shit about how we should totally destroy Cocoon and kill everyone and what have you. Like, totally Sarah kind of talk. Of course, it's just Bartandalus, and he says that he has appointed Cid Raines as Primarch in his stead, which has prompted the cavalry to mount an attack to try to kill Orphan, figuring that Cid has betrayed them. Now they don't really have a choice. We can either kill Orphan ourselves, or sit back and watch someone else do it. Oh yeah, we also fight Bartandalus again, and he leaves us another airship to get back to Eden. I'm sure I don't have to tell you why this is a really fucking stupid plot development. If using the cavalry to kill Orphan was always a choice that Bartandalus had, then why in God's name does he need us to become Ragnarok? If he could have just used the cavalry from the beginning, why didn't he? His word is gospel to the people of Cocoon. Anything he says, they'll do. All he has to do is say that, oh, Eden told me to tell you guys that they want you to kill them. Boom! Problem fucking solved! Everyone decides that we should protect Orphan and not let the several million people on Cocoon be sacrificed so that the fal'Cie can get their mommy back. Thus ends Chapter 11. Hi, me from the future again. So while I was editing this video and watching back my playthrough, I came across this scene, and I just wanted to complain about it, right? Okay. So right after we beat Bartandalus, we see one of those side quest crystals appear, and Vanilla is all like, oh, I suppose it could be a recording of what happened here, without any inference or reasoning to suspect that. But it just so happened to be the correct assumption out of all the things it could be. Story writing like this pisses me off so much. It overall just lowers the quality of the game in the story that it's trying to tell when they do bullshit like this. Chapter 12 starts with Cid Raines giving a speech, and we get treated to the game crashing the Indy 500 at Cocoon. And honestly, this cutscene is one of the best spectacles this game has to offer, which is an achievement because every cutscene in this game is a fucking spectacle. We start things off with a 1v1 against the mech we fought at the very start of the game, a great way to show our character's growth from the beginning of the series. Meanwhile, whilst we're off crashing the races, the cavalry starts summoning forth a bunch of monsters from Pulse and causing a general panic amongst the civilian population. Cid Raines is then murdered by that guy whose name I still don't know with the really nice hair. We do our best impression of the Dream on Kratos meme, and Lightning, finally, for the first time in nearly 25 hours of playtime, uses her goddamn gravity powers again. We fight our way through some soldiers and make our way to the undeniable worst part of the entire game. Everything up to now has been annoying and tedious, but this tiny little section, the fucking expressway, is by far the worst. Jam-packed with fights that can take 5 to 10 minutes at a time, a long, tedious run, monsters that can one-shot kill you. It's moments and sections like these that make people want to quit games and never come back to them. It is just so goddamn awful. And at the end of it, we meet back up with Roche, who is still the stupidest motherfucker in the entire game. Snow tells him we're on the same side. He acknowledges it and then says it doesn't matter because we're a l'Cie, as if we aren't the one fucking chance he has at saving Cocoon. And you know what? his boss fight just adds to the fucking hatred I have for the expressway, cause it is just as fucking stupid. The boss fight with the Proudclad was my breaking point. Since around chapter 7, I had not been having any fun, and steadily, with each new chapter, my hatred and frustrations with the game were only growing. And this dude made them tip over the threshold of what I deem worthy of playing. So I gave up. I stopped playing. Final Fantasy XIII frustrated me so much in its second half that I quit playing the fucking game. However, I still have a story to finish here. So let me just tell you what happens for the last 2 hours or so of the game. And yes, I realize I was extraordinarily close to the end of the game, but I could not put up with Square Enix's insufferable design choices any longer. After beating up Roche and his following retreat, we set off to try and put an end to this and stop Bartandalus. We try and find our way to Eden Hall, which is like the center of Eden, where the Fal'Cie Eden is located, but are stopped by a gate. Snow's friends from way back at the start of the game come in clutch and open the gate for us. Hope tries to fit in with Nora to be a cool kid, but he just comes off as awkward.
You concentrate on saving Cocoon.
We all will, together.
The rest of Nora take off to go rescue civilians and injured while we enter into Eden Hall. While we're walking into Eden Hall, our party notices a bunch of little crystal fragments floating around in the air. Bartandalus shows up and tells us that the ruckus is bringing forwards the Maker just as he wants. He informs us that he and Orphan await at the highest seat in Eden, and hints that our loved ones might be in danger. We elect to do things the typical Snow way, that being charge in head first and hope things work out for the best. We get pinched between some Sanctum soldiers and Pulse forces, having to fight our way out. We watch as the Sanctum soldiers are turned into Seath, the result of being given a branding whilst not receiving any focus. They're being used as sacrifices for the Maker. We finally catch back up with Roche and do battle yet again. This is as far as I've ever gotten, having not been able to beat this boss when I first played on the PS3 all the way back when I was like 7 years old. After beating him again, Roche despairs about the fact that he had to kill millions of innocents just to keep the populace from panicking. He finally has a change of heart as he orders all of his troops to stand down and instead focus on evacuating as many civilians as possible. He essentially relieves everyone of their duty. He tells the party to continue on to save Cocoon, Snow tells him to stay alive, but those noises he's making, it doesn't really sound like the noises of a man who's gonna live through this. He then detonates the Ironclad, sacrificing himself to block off the entrance into the Heart of Eden so that no one may follow us in. Deep inside Eden Hall, the building begins to collapse in on itself and we are transported to Orphan's Cradle, the real Heart of Eden. We do exactly as we have done for the rest of the game, fighting through hallways of enemies that are copy-pasted over and over until finally we find ourselves face to face with Bartandalus once more. He teleports Daj and Sarah into the room, making little illusions of them shattering. He employs us again to just kill Orphan and put an end to Cocoon, as a mercy, reasoning that as long as Cocoon exists, it will conflict with Pulse. Of course, everyone is all like, "Nah homie, we came here to kill you," and Barty tells them to obey if they really wish to end Cocoon's suffering. Of course, we get treated to another Bartandalus fight. We beat him up and he slips down into this little pool and says some shit about release at last. Everyone celebrates for a time, thinking that they won, protected Cocoon, and beat the big bad. But of course, Barty merges together with Orphan, and this is where the real true last boss of the game starts. We beat on Orphan for a time, but they start doing some weird magic shit which incapacitates everyone but Fang. Orphan reveals that they use people to become l'Cie because their powers are finite, whereas the potential of humans is infinite. Orphan begins to torture Vanille in front of Fang, asking her once more to become Ragnarok. Fang says that she will do it, she'll become Ragnarok, and she will kill Orphan. Everyone jumps in to try and stop Fang, but she does some cool Dragoon dives and shit, and everyone in the party, except for Vanille for some reason, turns into a Seath. Fang just kinda lets him beat on her for a bit before turning into Ragnarok, who does in all honesty look pretty fucking badass. We then start getting flashbacks of everything that's happened in the story up to this point, everyone remembering what they've been through, and Vanille monologues over it about how anger wasn't ever a driving factor, but that we had something to fight for. And after the flashbacks end, we see Fang turned back to human, Orphan heals her up just to torture her some more as to force her to try to become Ragnarok again. Vanille gives a nice emotional speech about how she would rather fight and lose than give up, and everyone comes to her rescue, having turned back from being a Seath somehow. Everyone makes up and becomes friends again, and they talk a bit about the future they saw whilst they were as a Seath, with everyone smiling and laughing and having a grand old time, and it's honestly a pretty emotionally charged scene that would have hit me in the feels a lot more if the gameplay hadn't ruined the rest of the experience for me. Orphan starts doing some screeching shit and everyone's brand turns white like fangs. Orphan then slinks down into the puddle, Vanille throws up some more of her gang signs, and everyone gears up for the real final confrontation. Lightning gives a nice speech about their focus being living to make the impossible possible, and we get thrown into the final fight. The final confrontation with Orphan is a battle in which the party leader has Doom, however, they are quite generous with the amount of time, so you really shouldn't have to worry about it. After you properly beat the shit out of Orphan for the final time, he screeches and screams and falls down again. We see Cocoon turn off, everything goes blank, and the world starts to fall. Everyone grabs each other's hands, except for Fang and Vanille. Fang and Vanille decide that they are going to use their powers to become Ragnarok again, but this time, not for the purpose of destroying Cocoon. They pop out of the bottom and turn everything into crystal, successfully preventing Cocoon from ever falling to Grand Pulse. We then get to see the party locked into crystal stasis, and it fades to white. We hear Vanille calling out for them to wake up, and everyone turns back to normal. Everyone talks for a moment about having completed their focus and noticed that their brandings are all gone. Sarah and Dodge then come forwards, having turned back from their crystal stasis as well. Everyone embraces and has a nice touching moment together. We pan up and get to see deep into Cocoon where Vanille and Fang are stuck holding hands together as Crystal. After which the credits begin to roll and we have ended not only chapter 13, but the game as well. So that's the entire story of Final Fantasy XIII from start to finish, a nearly 13-year-old game now based on its worldwide release. Did I get the answers I was looking for? Having played through Final Fantasy XIII, do I think the criticisms of it were fair? Yes, I think the criticisms of the first game of the Lightning Saga are very well deserved. I understand exactly what problems people have with this game. The combat is either a hit or miss for you, and even when it is a hit, it's actively working against you with poor design choices, such as the party leader dying equating to a full wipe, or the stupid animation it has to play every time you want to paradigm shift. The boring linear progression through 90% of the game is absolutely dreadful, and I'm in no way, shape, or form trying to say that linear story-driven games are bad, but for a game like this to work well, you need to have spice. You can't expect the player to walk down the same copy-pasted hallway fighting the same exact enemies over and over for 4 hours straight and not start to get annoyed. And yes, while the game does have an open portion to it, that's all the way in chapter 11. By that point, you've played probably close to 20-25 hours of walking through some hallways interrupted by meaningless cutscenes every 5 steps. A lot of people compare this game's linearity to Final Fantasy X, and in a lot of ways, that's a very fair comparison. But there's one major difference that I feel keeps Final Fantasy X on its toes when it comes to not being as bad as Final Fantasy XIII, and that's the sheer number of different areas that you actually go to. I want you to take a look at this list of locations from Final Fantasy X. The games play out almost the exact same way. You have to progress through a bunch of non-optional areas of the game until you reach towards the end, in which there is a more open grassy plains area. But comparing the list of areas that you go to in Final Fantasy X to the list of areas you go to in Final Fantasy XIII, you can see a stark difference. The two games are similar in total amount of playtime the average person will have. So the fact that Final Fantasy XIII has so few areas is where the problems of its linearity come into play. Because there are so few areas with so much playtime, everything feels longer, more drawn out, and tedious compared to 10, which has a much wider selection of places for the player to visit. It could have been fine had you spent a lot less time in each area the game had to offer, or even if they didn't want to do that, they could have done something such as flipping between the characters more often to break up the tedium. For example, you spend the entire Chapter 5 only playing as Lightning and Hope, but we already know that Saz and Vanille are off doing something elsewhere. Why not just have it so that there's 12 chapters, and instead of 5 focusing just on Lightning and Hope, and 6 just on Saz and Vanille, have one chapter, that being 5, in which it jumps between the two pairings more often. It's not perfect, but simple solutions like that can make it so much better. The characters are also a minor problem. They're exceedingly annoying at the worst of times and just okay at the best of times. No one is an extraordinarily memorable or well-written or impactful character. Hell, the most interesting and memorable character in the entire cast is Sid Raines, and he has like 30 minutes of total screen time. Snow and Hope are both obnoxiously hard to listen to, Hope constantly whining about how Snow killed his mother and how angry he is about it, and Snow having his delusions of grandeur constantly. The rest of the main cast are pretty inoffensive. I just wish that Saz got more screen time than he actually did, because although he isn't my favorite character, that would be Vanille, he is by far the most charismatic and enjoyable character. There is a lot of good with this game, but there's also a lot of bad with it. If they had just let it stew in the oven for maybe a year longer and had a proper idea of where they wanted to take the game before throwing it together, I think it could have been amazing. Final Fantasy XIII is just alright. I don't think I'd ever recommend people to play this game over another JRPG, especially when there's like a whole slew of better JRPGs just from Square Enix alone. But I also wouldn't ever dissuade someone from playing it if they already had an itch to do so. This isn't the end, however. This quest and journey has just started. Like I said, I sought out to see the whole saga, not just the first game, which means that next up on the chopping block is a game I actually remember quite fondly and have played twice now, Final Fantasy XIII 2. That, however, is for next time. For now, I'm gonna go to sleep because I've been working on this video nearly 18 hours a day for the past, 3 or 4 days. Good night. Final Fantasy XIII 2 is the first direct sequel to Final Fantasy XIII, and the second stop on our 3-stop journey through the Lightning Saga. It was released in the West January 31st of 2012 and reached my grubby little fingertips the same year. And unlike Final Fantasy XIII, I remember this game, and I remember it quite fondly. In fact, I remember this game more fondly than I do most entries in the Final Fantasy series, having played it twice now, although last time was about 5 years ago. And before I start, I want to take a moment to thank everyone who watched the original video and subbed. So if you don't care and just want to skip to where I start talking about the game, the timestamp should be on screen somewhere. So I just wanted to take a moment to say, I started this whole YouTube thing because I've got some seriously bad ADHD, and I wanted a project to actually focus on and give my all to for once in my life. And seeing the support I've gotten is honestly really great. I never figured I would have gotten to 100 subs, much less a quarter of 1,000. And I mean support in every way, not just the comments in favor of the video saying they enjoyed it, I did a good job, but also the comments that are criticizing and helping point out, my flaws. All of these comments help me out immensely because I do think that the video is an objectively poorly put together one. And it's something I'm not, super happy with. None of my videos are, for that matter. I'm still growing and learning how to do everything, so comments like these ones that point out flaws or critique my works, I appreciate them exponentially, and I welcome them. Although there was one comment that cracked me up, and it's this one right here. And disregarding the rest of the comment, this part right here about how I'm probably a 30-year-old man got a chuckle out of me. I mean, hey, you were close on the age guess. You were only off by about 11 years. I turned 20 next month, but you know what they say, 20 is the new 30 and all that, and you know, I'm 19, which is basically 20, so we can round up, so you know, I'm actually pretty basically 30, so you know, I'll give it to you. You were close. With that said, however, you know, as I mentioned before, I wasn't really happy with how I put together my FF13 video, with it essentially being just me recapping the story. It's something I thought about a lot after I uploaded it and watched it back one more time, so don't expect this video to be similar to that previous one. I'm gonna try my hardest to do have a little more structure with it and actually discuss the things I like and dislike with the game going forwards. Now then, with all that boring intro stuff out of the way, let's get to actually talking about the game. So I wanted to get this out of the way as soon as I possibly could, because I think it will be the biggest barrier to entry to anyone trying to play this game in the year 2023 and going forwards. I cannot imagine most people will be going out and finding a copy of this game for their PS3 or Xbox 360. What most people, including me, will do is opt to play it through the Steam port. And oh man, oh me, oh my, was this a shockingly bad port. Like, FF13 had its problems with its port, but I never really experienced anything too terrible with it. The biggest problem I had there was it sometimes struggled to maintain a consistent 60 FPS. 13.2 on the other hand has those frame rate issues as well as a whole slew of other problems. So as I just mentioned, 13.2 suffers from some really bad frame rate issues, and seemingly at random. Sometimes when I'm running around the world, the game is going completely fine and without any issues in the slightest. But then I move to a new area and all of a sudden, we're dropping to like 20 FPS. And it's not like I'm running the game on a toaster. I've got a decently strong PC, not like the top of the line, but still strong enough to run pretty much any game I could want to play at 60 FPS on the highest graphics, especially a game that came out 11 years ago. But of course, I wouldn't be making an entire section dedicated to the game being a buggy port if it was just the frame rate issues. Now, I was expecting the FPS drops since 13 had them as well. However, I also distinctly remembered that the game crashed quite often back when I was playing it in late 2017 and early 2018. And sure enough, not even 20 minutes into the game, right after getting through the opening, as I was loading into the tutorial segment, my game crashed, and I wasn't trying to deal with the constant crashes, so I looked a bit online. What I found from the search was that a lot of people are saying the problems arise because the game only allows for up to 2 GB of VRAM. There is a patch for this online to allow for 4 GB of VRAM usage. However, others said that just turning off the Steam cloud saving fixes the issues as well. And not wanting to have to, mess too much with mods and patching, since I'm not all too well versed in the workings of PCs other than how to build one and how to play games, I opted instead to just shut off the cloud saving. And to my joy, it worked. The crashes, for the most part, stopped. Although not entirely, the only other time I crashed was twice back to back about 15 hours of playtime into the game. Now, those two problems could have been forgiven, and I would have only mentioned them in passing if it were not for this last bug. So I want you to take a look here at the screen. Now you might miss it because it's quite hard to tell what's happening, but if you have 20/20 vision like me, you should be able to tell that, that all-encompassing black void is it's not supposed to be there. Now this bug is different from the other ones where it can happen at random. It's actually a bug that is initiated by the player. When it first showed up, I had no idea why it was there, but eventually, a few hours later, I realized what causes this void to start rearing its ugly head. So what you need to understand is that I'm not constantly recording my playthroughs. That would amount in way more footage than I actually need for these videos. What I opt for instead is to record somewhere between 4 to 8 hours of various random things in the world whenever I'm not talking about something specific or just need background footage. And accompanying that footage of random things is footage of me doing the major story events, cutscenes, moments, etc., which usually leaves me in the 12 to 16 hours of recordings range. Now I'm telling you this because you gotta understand that I alt-tab a lot to start and stop recordings, and whenever I do so, I've gotten into the habit of hitting escape, because it pauses the game and brings up a menu to quit out, making it perfect to start a recording right as a cutscene is starting. Now while this was convenient for FF13, it has become a nuisance in 13.2, because this is the way you spawn in the Black Void. You open up any of the menus, this can be your inventory, the map, anything like that, and you press escape. Once you tab back into the game, you'll notice that the background has changed to be completely black. This means the Black Void has successfully been summoned forth. And the weirdest thing about this is that it doesn't take effect everywhere. It's only on specific spots on specific maps. For example, the Brescia Ruins gets it extraordinarily bad. However, the Archive Steppe, it's hardly, if at all, ever noticeable. There is, however, one saving grace, a light in the dark. That being a way to make this port not so sucky. There is a superbly extensive guide on not only how to mod the game so that it's fixed and runs like it should have, but also enhances it past what a normal port would be expected to do. Of course, just because there is ways to make the game run well does not excuse the absolutely mind-bogglingly bad porting job that has been done for the PC. Square Enix is a very wealthy and very well-known and highly regarded developer and publisher. This kind of a porting job should never have happened. But I mean, there is no use in spending more time complaining about it now because it is never going to get fixed, and if you want to make it run how it should have been running from the start, then you'll have to do it yourself. Or like, go out and find a copy for your PS3 or Xbox and play it that way. Let's say, however, you got past the hurdle that is the overwhelmingly poorly done port. How does the game play? If you've seen the original video on FF13, you know that I really disliked the execution of its combat. I thought the core idea of it was really extremely interesting, while the implementation of that idea was lacking. Namely, my major issues were the paradigm shifting having that unnecessary animation tied to it, the party AI being a little wank at times, and should your party lead die, it's an instant game over. And I can happily, with a big giant wide smile on my face, say that they fixed almost every problem I had with its combat. That smile, however, doesn't last super long, because in fixing a lot of those issues, they bring out a whole new bag of issues that are this game exclusive. So gone are the days of long animations during a shift, now you're able to just shift and be done with it. Gone are the days in which your party leader's death equates to a party wipe. Now instead, should your party leader die, you just switch to the other living party member to act as your lead. Gone as well is the 3 party member setup. Now you only have 2 permanent party members, that being our 2 protagonists, and in place of what would usually be a 3rd party member, we are granted the monster system. The monster system is simple really. You have a chance to catch a monster from a battle, kinda like a Pokemon, after which you can toss them into your team. Each monster has one of the party roles, so one monster could be a synergist and another could be a ravager, so on and so forth. And you can have up to 3 monsters on your team at a time that you can switch between. And this is where my first gripe with the combat comes into play. You have less freedom of choice overall when it comes to your paradigms. Very minor, however it may be, it is still something that I feel is a downgrade from the first game. In FF13, all 6 of your party members have access to all 6 of the roles. The monsters in this game can only have 1 role, which means that now, instead of having a total of 18 roles across 3 different party members, you were only granted 15 roles across 2 permanent party members and 1 interchangeable / superfluous member. I know that it is an extremely small problem, if it's a problem at all, but this is my video, and I'm a petty bitch, and I appreciated the freedom granted by having every role on every character in the first game. These aforementioned monsters also have a unique ability known as the Feral Link. Feral Links are monster-specific abilities, in which you do a short QuickTime event. The better you perform the QuickTime event, the stronger the output of the ability. Each ability does their own thing, be it damage, a heal, removing debuffs, so on and so forth. I don't hate these, however, a good majority of Feral Links are not useful at all and kind of pointless. Another new mechanic that was introduced into this game is the wound mechanic. Basically, some attacks from enemies have the chance to inflict wound damage. Wound damage you sustain will lock out from your max HP pool. So if you have 800 HP total and you take 10 wound damage, your max HP is reduced down to 790 for the remainder of the battle. For the most part, wound mechanics only come up during boss fights and unique encounters. The way you get rid of a wound during a fight is by using a wound potion, an elixir, a phoenix down provided that the party member used on was dead, and certain Feral Link abilities. If you couldn't tell, I don't really like the wound mechanic. It just seems really pointless and almost like a band-aid for this game's lack of difficulty, because for the most part, this game is really fucking easy. Even without the wound mechanic, I was never worried that I was gonna fail a fight. As it is, it just serves to be an annoyance to force the player to spend a little extra gil on some wound potions to patch themselves up during a fight. And I can understand why people might enjoy the wound mechanic, because at its core, I think it is a interesting and neat mechanic. I feel like it would have just been served better if it was only for specific enemies and fights, as a sort of way to make them stand apart from the crowd, similar to the Doom mechanic from the Eidolon fights in FF13. On the topic of the game's difficulty, it is almost the polar opposite of 13. Where in 13, the game was actually a decent challenge where you'd have to use your brain to win encounters and beat bosses. This game requires approximately 0% of your brain cells to be functioning in order to win a majority of the time. I unironically think that you could just run a Ravager Commando Medic paradigm, not shift for the entire game, and probably still 5-star most of the fights. It is so unbelievably easy, I was tempted for a moment to download the difficulty mod just to bump up the challenge a bit. Because believe it or not, I actually enjoyed the level of difficulty FF13 was at. I just didn't like a lot of the design choices surrounding the combat paired with the difficulty the game brought. Leveling up is pretty much the exact same idea as before, except this time around you have one Crystarium board shared between all roles available, rather than before where each role had its own different pathway that you just leveled up. Each time you level up a board to the max, you can pick between a few bonus options. It's a nice way to give players a choice with how they choose to progress their characters. The monsters level up slightly differently than the characters do. Instead of gaining CP, you use little components and items that you get from defeating other monsters or purchasing from shops to level them up. You can also merge monsters together to give more favorable bonuses to monsters you actually like. Each monster also has a few randomly assigned traits to it, each meaning something different. For example, early peakers can only get up to level 20. Strong monsters get strength improvements, so on and so forth. This is something I do not like so much when it comes to growing a monster. If you've seen my video on Genshin Impact, you know I really despise RNG when it comes to character progression, so the monsters having a chance of randomness is annoying to me, although it's really not the end of the world. The weapon upgrading system from 13 is gone and has been replaced with a more traditional Final Fantasy system of just getting gradual weapon upgrades as the story progresses, although there is still a form of upgrading weapons in which to buy certain stronger weapons, one of the required components can be older, weaker weapons. One final change that I kinda do and don't like in a way is battles are now random, with the monsters just spawning in, giving you the chance to hit them to start an encounter with a preemptive strike, or just walk up and touch them to get a normal battle. This is nice, it makes avoiding battles easier, and makes getting preemptive strikes easier. At the same time, however, there was a certain charm to 13 having the enemies visible on the world's map. It made it feel a little bit more lively when you saw the enemies you were gonna fight walking about the world. However, at the end of the day, I am more or less indifferent to this change. I think that both styles have merit to stand on their own, so I will let you decide which you prefer. I believe that is for the most part everything important pertaining to the combat and player progression. In a lot of ways, it's an improvement from FF13, however, it's also got some changes that do kinda suck. I can kinda see it going either way in terms of which combat people enjoy more, because they both have their strengths and weaknesses. For me personally, I enjoyed the moment-to-moment mechanics of 13.2 more. However, I would have appreciated a little more difficulty similar to 13. Hello, yes, it's me from the future. I forgot to mention this here, but I kinda touched on it with Phalanx a little bit. There's a fucking ton of QuickTime events in this game. I never really minded QuickTime events, to be honest, but I know that a lot of people hate them, so I figured that it is worth mentioning that, they're here and they're quite prevalent, mostly whenever you fight a boss. If you do good in them, you'll usually get a bonus reward at the end of a boss encounter, and that's really to the extent that they affect the gameplay. Alright, let's get back to the video now. Now, while the combat and character progression have made some improvements and also brought out some new problems, I think there is one part of this game that was undoubtedly much better than 13 was. Let's face it, FF13 was not really that great when it came to letting its world shine. We only got to see a few small linear areas and never got to learn much about them as we went through them, only being spoon-fed small bits of lore and history for each one as we went through, provided you don't go and read through the million data log entries, which I can guarantee most people won't have done, and if you did do that, I've got so much respect for you. 13 and 13.2 are set in the same world. We go and visit locations that we've already been to, places we've already seen before, and it makes sense from a business and money-making perspective to do this. They already have the assets ready to use from 13 and they want to capitalize on the success, so they just have their player revisit the places that we did in 13. 13.2 just overall does a better job at letting its world shine and setting up set pieces. I mean, so many of these locations are absolutely stunning, it just goes to serve to put into perspective how pretty the Lightning Saga actually was at the time. I mean, Academia is one fictional city that I would kill to live in. I mean, just take a gander at it. It's gorgeous, except for the part where people are, being turned into Seath, but that gets fixed eventually. And noticeably right off the bat, the areas that you are visiting are significantly less linear overall, with more branching paths and different routes for the player to use for navigating the world. However, most importantly, side activities. That's right, baby. Not only is the world less linear, but there's actually, from the get-go, side quests and side activities for the player to engage in. Not even 30 minutes into the game, and I was given a side quest to go find some medical supplies. It was such a refreshing feeling to see that there were actually things other than just the main story to do in each area. And yeah, to be fair, most of the time the side activities do boil down to just being a fetch quest or a hunting job, which can get rather stale and boring really fast, but then there are things like this. I came to this completely optional area of the game because there was an item I needed for the main story here, which sounds a little contradictory. I know, like, if it's an optional area, why is there something you needed for the main story here? Which I'll cover in a bit. But basically, the TLDR is just, you need to get 5 specific items for the main story, and there's 7 total, 4 of which are located in non-optional areas, 3 of which are located in areas that are potentially completely optional. Meaning you'll have to travel to one of them, but you can choose which one of the 3 you wish to go to. I'm getting sidetracked here. As I was saying, there are times where things such as this optional side quest story happen, in which you have to find 5 colored flan and help them get back home safely, after which they all try jumping you, and you get a nice callback to the beginning of the game where Sarah was revealed to be a teacher whose nickname was Meanie Miss Farron, because she can be a real bitch at times, and we get to see her wonderfully mean teacher charm here. These were the kind of optional moments that were sorely lacking in the first game. And speaking of optional, I quickly touched on it during my little rant there, but there are optional areas in this game. Completely and utterly optional, which, credit where it is due, 13 also had. However, there is a difference. 13's optional areas do not come into play until you've gone through most of the game. 13.2's optional areas can come into play really early. The first optional area that I got to visit was the Brescia Ruins 300 AF. It's basically just a snowy version of the Brescia Ruins in which you are limited to the top portion of the map, but this entire place is completely optional. You never need to come here, and unlike 13, I was able to get here not even 5 hours of playtime into the game. That is massive. That means that any point along my journey through the main story, I could stop and take a break and go do other optional tasks. You could not do that in 13. Taking a break from the main story in FF13 looked something along the lines of exiting the game and playing something else for a bit. I cannot express enough how much having all this optional content makes the main story more tolerable. And to top it all off, the absolute cherry on the cake, you can revisit past areas whenever the hell you want to. Unlike 13, you can choose to go back to an area you've already been to. And in fact, the game wants you to. It will actively send you back to older locations to grab an item that you need or unlock a different branching path to progress the main story. And speaking of main story, this seems like a perfect time to start talking about it. And you had better buckle up because the story is fucking bonkers. So do y'all remember in my first video how I spent basically 50 minutes explaining the story? I'm gonna try and not do that here, and instead just go over the main important bits. The story opens with a beautiful cutscene set in the mythical city of Valhalla of Lightning fighting this dude named Caius Ballad, who is just way too overly edgy, which is how you can tell he's the bad guy. During the fight, this other fellow named Noel Kreis falls out of the sky. Lightning grabs him and gives him this little annoying piece of shit Moogle, which, mini rant about here, I cannot fucking stand little mascot characters like this in games. You know, this Moogle from 13.2, Morgana from Persona 5, fucking Paimon from Genshin. I can't stand characters like this. Anyways, Lightning tells Noel to go find her sister and bring her to Lightning in Valhalla. We get to see Sarah having a dream of all this happening right before a meteor falls and Noel arrives. They go check the meteor and Noel says that it's a time gate that they can use to travel between time. That's right, baby. 13.2 is a time travel story. Noel and Sarah decide they should set off and go find Lightning. We arrive in the Brescia Ruins 5 years after Cocoon fell, which is how they denote time in this game, marked as AF, 5AF being 5 years after Cocoon fell, and are promptly attacked by a giant floating fist. This is where we're introduced to the paradoxes, basically things from different timelines appearing in timelines that they aren't meant to be in. For example, the floating fist is actually Atlas, a giant war machine from the future appearing in the past. We are then promptly arrested because we're, suspicious individuals who just popped out of a time gate, but we're quickly bailed out by a new character, Alyssa Zidell. She works for the Academy, which is the governing power that has taken over Cocoon in the vacuum left after the Foul Sea were dealt with. She asks for our help in dealing with Atlas. We do so, getting the choice to weaken him or fight him head on. After beating Atlas, we find a graveyard for those who died in the Purge, and we get an artifact, basically the key to opening gates and jumping through time. We get the choice between two gates here. I choose to go first to the Yashas Massif 10AF. There we meet Hope and Alyssa again, and we get to see an Oracle Drive. Hope explains that the city used to be home to the Farseers, people who can see the future, and the drive is like a stored version of the visions they've seen. Through the Oracle Drive, we see what happened at the end of 13 with Cocoon falling and being propped up by the pillar, and go to find another artifact, opening a gate to Erba 200AF. Put a pin in that though, because for now, we go back to the Brescia Ruins to open up the other gate to the Sunlit Waterscape 300AF. We meet up with Snow, who's looking extra edgy now, and he basically says he's trying to stop this massive flan from nibbling away at the pillar holding up Cocoon. We leave in search of a way to weaken the flan and arrive at this Colosseum to get a fragment from this time dude. The Colosseum won't come into play until later when I talk about the DLC, so just kinda don't pay it any mind right now. We also go to the Archival Steppe, Unknown AF, where a big dragon monster is sucking up all the flan. We quickly put a stop to that and return to the Waterscape where Snow is trying to fight the flan again and getting his ass kicked. We beat it and solve the paradox. Snow disappears because he don't belong in this time. We head off to finish up what we started in Erba 200AF. In Erba, we do a bunch of little mini puzzles to restore the world back to normal. We come across another Oracle Drive and see more about what happened at the end of 13. Yule, who is the Cirrus that Hope had mentioned before, is also here. Noel apparently knows her, but Caius shows up and tells us that it is not the same Yule and that there is a ton of Yules across all manner of timelines. We do battle with him, after which they both run off, and we open up an alternate version of the Yashas Massif, indicated by an X in place of a 0. We meet up with a different Yule and she says that Sarah and her are alike. We have a repeat of the meeting with Hope and Alyssa here and rewatch the Oracle Drive, which now shows lightning fighting Caius in Valhalla. Noel tells the story about how Cocoon will eventually fall, which prompts Hope to start searching for a way to prepare for such an eventuality. We get to see as Yule dies and Caius carries her off. We briefly make a pit stop in this place called the Void Beyond, and Noel tells Sarah a bit more about Yule. After we get back to our time hopping, we wind up in Academia 400AF, a massive city built on Pulse, powered by a proto-Fal'Cie that Hope had created. The Fal'Cie does not like us and starts turning random civilians into Seath to get in our way. We run into Caius, who tells us we are contradictions in the timeline. He says that we cannot be here because we died in a tower 200 years prior. We of course get really confused and give chase, eventually running into Yule, who is murdered by a hentai tentacle monster that we promptly kill. Yule tells us that Caius isn't actually in the city and dies, leaving us an artifact that we use to travel through a nearby gate to get to Augusta Tower 200AF. I take a detour shortly after arriving to go to Augusta Tower 300AF to get a key necessary to ascend the tower. After doing so, we head back to 200AF and meet an AI version of Alyssa, who reveals that in 13AF, she and Hope were murdered after Hope refused to give the Fal'Cie the full powers of a natural-born Fal'Cie. The AI killed everyone and made duplicate versions of them to cover it up, before creating the proto-Fal'Cie Adam. We get to the top floor of the tower and meet the same Yule that we had met in Erba, which makes sense considering it's the same year. She gives us an artifact and tells us that Caius is immortal and that he knows the whole timeline from the Cirruses. She says that Caius, we saw in Academia, was an AI created by the Fal'Cie, and that if we continue to change the timelines, eventually it will return to how it was at the end of 13. We go to the very top floor and face off against the Fal'Cie Adam, who keeps regenerating. Eventually we yell at Hope in the past that his machines fucking suck, which he sees through an Oracle Drive and decides in the past to not make the machines, hence the one in the future that we're currently fighting disappears. And yes, Yule dies again, and Caius takes her away. We wind up in an alternate version of Academia 400 AF in which Hope and Alyssa are actually alive and travel to the future through use of a cryostasis machine thingamajig. Hope tells us his new plan, which is to build an artificial cocoon, but he needs 5 gravity cores to make it float, which is the items that I was talking about in the linearity section. He also says that if we find a chaos crystal, he could use it, which is optional, but getting it will reward you with some of the best weapons in the game. After we deliver all the cores to Hope, Alyssa gives us an artifact to use on the new gate in town. They see us off from said gate, and we get a monologue from Alyssa about how she's actually a paradox, and if we are to fix the timeline, she'll cease to exist. This is good. I like this character drama and real human emotion. She betrays us here for her selfish want to live, which is something a lot of people would probably do. We wind up at the Void Beyond again, and Sarah talks with a few different Yules who reveal that Etro, a goddess in this universe, is the one who undid the party's crystal stasis at the end of FF13, and that Sarah has the eyes of Etro which allow her to see the future, and that she and Noel are blessed by Etro. The last Yule tells her that she can have her heart's desires here, and that the more she changes time, the closer to death she draws. Sarah does battle with Caius, and he tells her that because Etro freed everyone from their crystal stasis at the end of FF13, she altered the timeline. The Yules are now cursed to die over and over at a young age, and he wishes to change that, even if it means killing her. He then murders Sarah, and she wakes up in a dream of New Bodom. She realizes that it's a dream when she sees a fake lightning, and Vanille and Fang appear to drag her out of it. They tell her to go rescue Noel from his dream. Sarah pops into Noel's dream and sees his past. Caius implores Noel to kill him and become the next guardian of the Cirrus. Doing so will grant him the Heart of Chaos, making him immortal. Should it ever stop beating, Valhalla will be unleashed, and history will cease to exist. Basically, time will stop flowing. Caius fights Noel and realizes he is too weak to kill him, so he departs to go kill Etro himself, to free Yule from the cycle of death and rebirth. Yule then has a vision and dies in Noel's arms. Sarah eventually wakes him up from his dream, and we depart from this dying world and arrive in New Bodom 700 AF, where we meet Lightning. She reveals what happened and how she came to be in Valhalla, having been sucked up and chosen as a champion basically for Etro. She reveals Caius' plan, which is to use the new cocoon and the old cocoon as a sacrifice to open Etro's gate, which will cause chaos to surge forth and bring the world to be the same state as Valhalla, in which time doesn't exist, freeing Yule from her curse. Which, I'm gonna be honest, at this point, I think we should just evacuate Cocoon and have everyone live on Pulse. Let's be real, this is twice now that a villain in the same universe has used Cocoon as a major key element in their evil master plan. And what is Cocoon really doing? Hope is making a new Cocoon because the old Cocoon is gonna fall, but why the fuck didn't we just have everyone move into Academia or build more cities? Pulse isn't exactly a small place. What was the point of building a new Cocoon if we could have just built more cities on Pulse? It's fucking stupid. Enough of my rambling though. Lightning says she'll be fighting Caius in Valhalla, whilst we have to stop Caius from bringing down both the new and old Cocoon in 500 AF. We all depart to start the final battle and arrive in Academia, with everyone having already been moved to the new artificial Cocoon. Yule tries her best to convince us not to fight Caius and to not kill Etro, which we just promptly ignore. We catch up to Caius, who turns into his Chaos Bahamut and attacks us, and we are saved by Hope. We give chase to him on an airship which is being piloted by Saz, who can time travel and conveniently showed up at the end of the game. A gate to Valhalla opens up and Caius goes through. We fight him and beat him again, and he still declares that he will kill Etro, and we try to convince him it's not what Yule would want.
You think this'll make Yule happy? Which Yule are you talking about? I've known and protected hundreds of Yules. They had the same soul. Every one of them was unique. A Yule who dreamed of travel. A Yule who loved to sing. A Yule who painted flowers. They all died. All of them. Before my eyes!
But despite that, she chose to live again. So she could be with you!
Caius then turns into his big ultimate form, that being Jet Bahamut, and we are blasted beneath the ocean and are saved by lightning and are thrust into the final boss fight. Caius once again implores Noel to kill him for Yule's sake, and when he refuses, impales himself onto Noel's blade, thereby killing himself. With that, the timeline is fixed and we return to 500 AF and are greeted with 9 different possible endings, so let's take a moment to go over each one, shall we? So starting off with the canonical ending, Saz grabs Vanille and Fang from the Cocoon Pillar before Cocoon falls. The new Cocoon, which is named Bonavelza, rises into the sky, and Sarah has another vision and fucking dies in Noel's arms. The sky then darkens and the bells toll and Valhalla is unleashed into the world. If you get to see the secret ending, it is revealed that Caius is actually alive and is chilling in Etro's throne room, gloating about how he won and how Noel played right into his hands and stuff. The ending is continued in the DLC released in May of 2012. Lightning does battle with Caius and sees a vision of her sister's death. She then finds her sister being possessed by an evil Yule who conjures up another Caius for her to fight. She begins to lose hope, thinking that she's doomed her sister to death by sending her on the journey, but is renewed when a vision of her sister appears and tells her she knew the consequences and doesn't regret anything. While Valhalla bleeds into the real world, Lightning goes up and takes a seat upon Etro's throne where she turns to Crystal to preserve the world and remember Sarah. And that's how the canonical ending goes. Now there are a bunch of different endings you can get called paradox endings, which are mostly just unique what if type scenarios, and these go as follows. Paradox ending number 1, a giant mistake. We get to see the Polshan Civil War that brought down Cocoon in the future that Noel is from. Both sides of the conflict release a bunch of atlases in the Archive Steppe. Sarah and Noel vow to kill them all. It ends with their weapons lodged into the crystal atop one of the atlas's heads. Paradox ending number 2, Mischievous Mog's giant plan with Flan. Jesus, that's a fucking mouthful. We turn into a Morochu and a mini Flan to go poison the giant Flan that's eating away at Cocoon's pillar in the Sunlit Waterscape, because he wants to make the world human-free and a world with just monsters. Paradox ending number 3, Vanille's Truth. In this one, Noel and Sarah are in the past, I think, and see a crystallized Vanille and promise that we'll go find Fang for her. Paradox ending number 4, Test Subjects. The main party is modified by the Proto-Fal'Cie Adam to act as guards in Augusta Tower. The party wonders what they were doing before losing their memory, and Adam questions if every human is just a bit paradoxical. Paradox ending number 5, The Future is Hope. Snow shows up in Academia 4XXAF and arrests Alyssa before she can give us the trapped artifact and betray us. He warns Hope that he's going to be assassinated in 3 days, and Noel stays back to keep watch, while Sarah and Snow run off to find 13 crystals. Paradox ending number 6, Beneath a Timeless Sky. The party plus Yule are trapped in Bodum 700 AF. Yule cannot see the future because the timeline has collapsed. A meteor lands where the gate did in Bodum 3 AF, and the gang goes to investigate. Editor's note, the way she runs is fucking hilarious. Paradox ending number 7, Fate and Freedom. Sarah remains in her dream after being killed by Caius, and thinks it won't be quite complete without Noel and Mog, but she can't really remember them. Paradox ending number 8, Heir to Chaos. Noel gets the Heart of Chaos and succeeds Caius as the Guardian of Yule. He sees the memories in the future and vows to save everyone from their doomed fate. And that is all the different endings that you can get. Most of the paradox endings are just cute little what-if type scenarios, and to be honest, they aren't really worth going for considering the amount of work that most of them take. So that is the complete story of 13.2, and I gotta say, I'm not a fan. I think it is By far a lot worse than 13's story, it is so needlessly complex and wacky. I don't think I've ever really found a time traveling plot that I've thought was great, but man oh man, this story feels so disjointed at times, because with each new time you go to, there's always a minor conflict, but there's also the larger overarching conflict with Caius. For example, when you go to academia, the plot is you gotta stop the Fal'Cie Atom and restore the city back to peace. But at the same time, there is always the overarching plot of stopping Caius and returning the timeline to how it should be. But for most of the middle part of the game, that takes a backseat to the smaller plot points in each individual timeline. It's just a very confusing and poorly presented narrative overall that will often leave the player scratching their head, which kinda sucks, because I think that the core of the story is at least a little compelling. A man who is cursed with immortality who can never die, being forced to protect a girl who can never live, so he decides to go kill the goddess Etro out of love for the girl? That's fucking great! It's compelling, and Caius is a very interesting character. And you know what? Speaking of characters, I took major offense when it came to the characters in FF13. I thought most of them were not very compelling or well written. 13.2 does not suffer as much from that problem, mostly for the fact that the main cast has been shrunken significantly. You'll only really get to know Sarah, Noel, Caius, Hope, Yule, and to a minor extent Alyssa. There are other returning characters as well, but they are mostly delegated to small and insignificant roles. Saz just shows up to fly an airship at the end, and Snow shows up to punch a giant slime. I like Sarah and Noel as protagonists, Sarah having the tables flipped from FF13, in which Lightning was trying to save her in that game, and now it's her trying to save Lightning. Her character stays mostly the same throughout the entire story, and honestly, whilst she's portrayed as the main character, she kinda takes a backseat to her supporting main protagonist, Noel. Noel is from the future in which Cocoon fell and most humans have been wiped out, as is the main antagonist, Caius. Because of this, a lot of the time it feels like the story is more geared towards Noel being the major player, since he's got a stronger connection to both Yule and Caius and the conflict at hand. Noel also really doesn't change much. Both he and Sarah are pretty steadfast in the characters that they are, both being pretty much unequivocally good and wanting to save the world and restore the timeline and, prevent the future in which everyone dies from coming to pass. They don't change much from that. Hope is the only character other than Lightning to return from the first game's playable cast that has a major role. He's grown up into a smart scientist and leads most major projects that the Academy has going on. He helps Noel and Sarah a ton throughout their journey, and most of the game's runtime is spent helping him out on whatever project he's working on or fixing a mistake that messes up the future. Alyssa is the only other notable new addition to the cast other than Caius and Yule, who I'll talk about in a moment, that gets a lot of screen time. She only gets as much as she does though because she kinda clings to Hope's side. Her betrayal of the main cast is probably the most interesting character moment from the game because it feels human. She should have died during a cave-in during the Purge, but she was revived when Etro freed everyone from Crystal, making her a paradox. If the cast fixes the timeline, she'll cease to be, and she's scared of that, so she does whatever she can to prevent it from coming to pass. She is serving in her own selfish act of wanting to live, and it's interesting. It's interesting stuff. This is the kind of character and story writing that I wish every character in the game had. On to Caius and Yule now. If there is one thing that Square Enix does well, it is writing villains that you can empathize with. Caius is like a father who is being forced to watch his daughter die hundreds of times over, and he eventually reaches a breaking point where he can't watch it anymore, and instead chooses to take matters into his own hands to try and save her. even if that's not what she wants. Yule's character is tragic. She's granted the ability to see the future, but each time that she has a vision, a bit of her life is stripped away. Thus, she always dies around the age of 15 and is reborn as a different version of herself. I can't really comment on her personality because we don't get to know her too well before she dies each time, but each one is different, as Caius points out in the end, where one might dream of traveling, another might like to collect flowers, so on and so forth. 13-2 has some really nice characters and also some mediocre and bland characters. Sarah and Enola serve as perfectly fine protagonists, although I wish we'd have gotten more from them in terms of character arcs. The returning cast of characters are a mixed bag of underwhelming, underutilized, and improvements from the first game, whilst a lot of the new characters show a promising future when it comes to the writing going into Lightning Return. So, before I jump into the conclusion and my final thoughts on the game, I wanted to just take a moment here to talk about the music, because 13 and 13-2 so far have been absolutely outstanding when it comes to their soundtracks. There are so many great tracks from both games, and I wish I had touched on it more when I was talking about FF13, but I think 13-2 has probably my favorite soundtrack from any Final Fantasy game, and I commend everyone who worked on it. Like, someone had to sit down and think, so we have the cast fighting this giant orange jelly monster. Should the track sound something like this?
Everybody get up, it's time to slam now. We got the real jam going down. Welcome to the Space Jam. Get your chance, do your dance at the Space Jam. Alright.
Or should it sound something like this? I really cannot give this game's soundtrack enough praise, so I'll just take the time to play you guys a few of my favorite tracks. That's enough listening to music though. We should get to wrapping up this video. I think as an overall experience, when the game is working and isn't a buggy mess, that FF13-2 is an improvement to FF13. I think both games have their strengths and their weaknesses, and I can totally understand if someone might like one and dislike the other, because they are different enough that they provide their own unique experiences. Me personally, I enjoyed 13-2 more, which I was expecting. I will admit, I had rose-tinted glasses for this game. I remembered enjoying it a lot more than I did this time. I remembered it as a great experience, but going back and replaying it, I was greeted with a just alright experience. As I said with 13, I wouldn't recommend you play this game over the slew of better JRPGs out there, but if you have the desire to play it, then you will probably find yourself enjoying it, if you can get it to work anyways. That is it though. That is the end of the video. I hope that overall this video is an improvement from my FF13 video. I honestly might, go back and redo that one someday because, to be honest, I'm not all that happy with it. And I welcome discussion in the comments, and I implore you guys to point out if I missed anything or I got something wrong or you have something to add. Please, I welcome it. I want to improve. I want to make better videos, so, don't hold back. And if you watched this far, you might as well drop a like and subscribe. But until next time, when I'll be covering Lightning Returns, take care and sweet dreams. I have put about 120 hours into the Lightning Saga over the course of roughly 2.5 months, with the express goal of figuring out whether or not the series is actually as bad as people say it is. In the pursuit of that forbidden knowledge, I have put out 2 videos covering FF13 and its sequel 13-2, and I think it's been clear thus far, this series has been striking a pretty good balance between tedious and enjoyable. And while each game has had their moments where I was having fun and enjoying myself, a lot of the playtime was spent honestly just wishing that they would be over with quickly. And part of this is on myself. I've played both 13 and 13-2 before, and although I didn't remember much of 13, they both still had that sense of deja vu where I remembered many aspects about them. Final Fantasy 13 Lightning Returns didn't have that same problem with me as I have never played before. I've never even really seen gameplay of it, to be honest with you, so I was excited to jump right into the world, because for me, new games and new experiences will always be more enjoyable or more favorable than replaying games I've already beaten, even if those games are some of my favorites. Now, this video is going to not only be covering my thoughts for Lightning Returns, but at the end will encapsulate my feelings for the series as a whole. If you want to hear about specific main story quests or zones, I'll be sure to mark them out in the description, so feel free to jump around the video as you see fit. And with that said, and out of the way, let's just jump straight into the game's mechanics, shall we? So I figured that this time around, I would merge the player freedom and linearity sections that I usually have with the combat and gameplay systems, since together they all make up what is the meat and potatoes of the game's core mechanics. And speaking of the game's mechanics, let's talk about the combat, because it was probably my least favorite element of the moment-to-moment gameplay. Now please note that I don't hate the combat in this game, and I actually think it was an improvement from the previous 2 entries, noticeably so in fact. The main idea of the combat is still there, with that of course being the ability to switch between 3 set customizable stances. Those stances being the paradigms that you have in 13 and 13-2, and now the newly introduced schemata in Lightning Returns. The schemata are in essence 3 different fully customizable kits that you can slap onto Lightning. And when I say fully customizable, I mean fully customizable. You can change what outfit she wears, which will often have an effect on which spells and abilities she can cast. You can change what weapon she has, which usually comes with its own set of substats. Same goes for changing her shield. You can give her 2 accessories as well as 1 adornment, which is basically just a decoration. And finally, you can assign up to 4 different abilities provided your outfit doesn't have locked abilities set to it. There is just a ton to customize here and play around with so that you get your perfect schema. It's way more customizable than the paradigms, which really only allowed for you to change which class your characters were on. And while it is more customizable, you do have a severe lack in overall choices of abilities when in the actual combat. Whilst, yes, there are more choices for spells and abilities overall, you are limited to the use of 12 of them when it comes to the combat itself, as opposed to being able to select any spell or technique or ability that you've gained manually up to that point in the prior game. So ultimately, there are many more aspects surrounding combat for you to engage in, but less overall ways to fight enemies when you're in an actual battle. And speaking of actual battles, let's take a look at how they play out, shall we? Similarly to FF13-2, enemies will spawn onto the map as you're exploring, giving you the ability to hit them with your weapon to initiate an instanced off battle. However, unlike 13-2, there is no time limit. meaning that you won't be automatically stuck into a battle if you don't hit them or run away fast enough, and can choose to completely avoid them should you please. But on the flip side, if you choose to engage in a battle, hitting the enemies or getting hit by the enemies will grant you a buff or debuff depending on the alertness of said enemy. Now what I mean by that is if you hit the enemy and they haven't noticed you at all, they will start the fight with 25% less HP. If you hit an enemy with them being aware of your presence, that's 10% less HP. And if you get hit by an enemy rather than you hitting them, you will start the battle with 5% less HP. It's a nice way to incentivize proactiveness when it comes to combat, provided you wish to actually engage the enemies in the field. And I say provided you want to engage with them because it really isn't a necessity to enter into many battles, unless you require mob drops for crafting or a quest, or maybe want to farm a weapon. Because unlike the previous games, and a change I kinda hate, you don't gain experience or levels or stat boosts or anything of the sort from engaging in combat, like almost every other JRPG and RPG under the sun. Instead, the way your character gains all of their stat boosts is by completing quests, main, side, or otherwise, and the reason I hate this is because those quote-unquote side quests ultimately wind up being less of optional activities and more or less necessary for the completion of the game, if you don't want to go into the final dungeon being unable to kill even the basic mobs. Because again, like the other games, the final act is for some reason an insane difficulty spike. Now with that said, most of your important and large increases in stats will come from the main quests, which leads me to believe that if you played on the easy difficulty, you could probably get away with not touching too many side quests. However, on medium, which is the difficulty I chose to play the game on, even having done something along the lines of 58 of the available 66 side quests, I was still left thinking to myself in the final act, man, this difficulty is noticeably increased. So I can imagine, had I not done nearly so much of the quests, I would have probably struggled a lot more. Is the final dungeon impossible? Well, no, definitely not, and in fact, I think overall it's a much more well-balanced game than the prior entries, but the choice to tie character stat increases to the completion of quests was just not a great one. Now with that said, let's get back to battles, and assume you did decide to hit the enemy to engage in Mortal Kombat. You'll be loaded into a separate instanced arena where you can fight your tiny little heart out. As stated before, the core idea is the same. You'll notice on the left hand side of the screen, you have 3 little colored bars. Those are your ATB gauges. Unlike the prior entries in the series where you just waited for the ATB to fill up, you start this game with a set amount, usually based on what outfit you're wearing grants you, and you can spend however much you have available on your 4 spells and abilities you have set to that specific schemata you are currently wearing, which you can see are mapped to your 4 buttons here on the right. You can then switch to one of your other 2 schemata by pressing the bumper/trigger buttons, and that previous schemata that you were just on will begin regenerating the ATB that you had just spent. This goes for all schemata that aren't currently active. Basically, you'll be dancing around your stances quite often to maximize the use of your ATB. Now let's talk about those spells and skills, because they obviously had to make some sacrifices and changes to make the new form of combat work, and a lot of those changes and sacrifices I'm not too keen on. Namely, needing to put your guard as one of your skill slots, and do keep in mind, you will need a guard on at the very least one of your schemata, because healing is limited in this game, which we will get to in a moment. Now outside of just having a slot that is dedicated to guarding, some outfits will also have locked abilities tied to them. For example, if you play with the Dragoon garb, then you will always have the ability Lancet locked to you. The Mikote dress will always have Metaguard and Magic Slash locked to it. Basically, it can, not always, but can be detrimental, because maybe you like the way a garb looks as well as the stats and substats that it gives you, but dislike the abilities locked to it, then you're just gonna have to choose one of those to give up. It just gets a little frustrating at times. It's not the end of the world, but it's something that feels counterintuitive to the whole pro player choice stance that they were taking when it came to the combat and player builds. Now I had mentioned before the fact that you are basically required to guard due to the lack of healing choices in the game. So, Here's what they did to the healing. They took the usual medic and healer role that is present in pretty much every other Final Fantasy and said let's do away with that. Instead, let's give the player a limited number of healing items that they can use during an encounter, and let's have every single item that could even remotely be counted as quote recovery take up a slot. This includes healing potions, Phoenix Downs, potions that grant defense buffs, potions that grant attack buffs, and so on. You get the point. I absolutely hate this. This is my single most hated change they made. I would have much preferred a spell system that grants you the ability to just heal yourself, rather than this stupid contrived limited healing item bullcrap that they're trying to pull. And I can hear those people who have already beaten or played the game typing their comments like, oh well Jay, you can still technically cast Curaga, and I am aware of that, and I'm going to use this moment to segue into the EP abilities. Basically, Lightning gets access to these things called EP abilities, which act as stronger, more impactful spells and moves to use both in and out of combat. Unlike ATB though, your gauge to use them does not recover over time. You start with a full gauge every time you beam down to start exploring, and can slowly spend said gauge on different abilities, things like Curaga to fully recover outside of battle, or Overclock, which essentially slows time for a bit during battle and allows you to use as many abilities as you want before the gauge runs out. You're awarded a teeny tiny little bit of EP back after each battle, meaning if you want to continuously use certain abilities, you'll be needing to engage in combat to earn them back. I was always lacking in EP points because of a cute little problem I ran into, which I have no clue if it is exclusive to me or not, but essentially, I was playing using a PS4 controller, and whenever I would try to switch my schemata in battle, on my PS4 controller, the button you press to switch schemata was also mapped to the button you would press to activate Overclock. Meaning that I was always activating Overclock if I had 2 or more EP points currently available to me whenever I tried to switch my schemata in battle. This was extremely infuriating because there were many EP abilities that I would have liked to use outside of battle, however I wasn't able to due to this teeny tiny mishap with the PS4 controller's button mappings. Things like Chronostasis, which allows you to pause the flow of time when you're not currently engaged in a fight. Which leads me into my next system I want to speak on, the time-based mechanic. As many of you may know, FF13 Lightning Returns operates on a time-based system, in which you start with 6 days to engage with all the content available before the final day rolls around and you're tossed into the story's finale. However, by completing side quests, you can gain something called Aradia. You then feed it to this giant biblically accurate tree, and after you give it a set amount, you'll gain extra days, up to a max of 8, totaling 14 days. Which on the surface seems like just a nice way to let players have extra time to complete everything they want to do, however, has a sneaky little bit of annoyingness attached to it. On the one hand, yes, it allows you more playtime, but on the other hand, it's an annoying way to time gate certain content. You wanted to do this quest, investigating ghost sightings in the city? Well, joke's on you, you have to wait until 12 AM to start, and you need to be finished by 6 AM. You wanted to purchase this strong weapon that you have the funds for? Well, you silly little kid, you gotta wait until day 10 to do that. You get the idea. Most content is locked into only being available during certain times of day, or locked behind waiting for certain days. And a lot of these days you can't get to without doing enough quests to feed enough Aradia to the tree to be able to unlock more time. And it's not like you ever feel as though you're short on time or anything like that because of Chronostasis. Even having the stupid PS4 controller bug, I was able to finish pretty much every side quest and main quest that I wanted to do by the end of day 10, leaving me 4 extra days of just running around and farming stuff. It just ties back to the illusion of having more optional content than it actually does. You want to get the best weapons or gear, then you'll have to do the side quests to get the extra days. You want to get the most stats, then you better farm up those side quests. Now, despite how nitpicky I'm being about this one point, that being my hatred for the questing system, I want to be clear. I enjoyed its approach to the layout of its content overall, leagues more than FF13 and 13.2. Now, obviously, I didn't cover every nitty-gritty little piece of content or mechanic out there because there is a ton in this game that you could go over, and I'm sure no one would care to listen about how you grow Gasol greens in the wildlands for 5 minutes straight, or how you can merge spells and abilities together to give more favorable substats to the spells you like, which is pretty much the exact same system as the monster merging in 13.2, but I tried to cover as much as I possibly could, and this opinion that I'm about to state goes for pretty much every aspect of gameplay, covered or otherwise. I think it's the best in the entire trilogy. The player freedom when it comes to builds and approaching both the story and side activities is superbly welcome coming off the back of two pretty damn linear games. The combat is also the most interesting of the offerings put forth in the trilogy, although I will take a moment here to share a thought about the combat. That being, I caught myself thinking, this would be much better if it was more action oriented. And by that, I mean do away with the loading into a separate instanced area and keep everything the exact same. The enemies already spawn into the world map as it is, why not change the button you have mapped to swinging your sword to initiate combat into a button to activate a sort of battle ready stance, and then you're able to just fight the enemies in the open map. I know it's not due to technical limitations, because they were able to achieve the exact same thing I'm talking about right now back in 2002 with Kingdom Hearts. Of course, that combat isn't exactly for everyone, but I figured I'd at least lay that little what-if scenario in your heads, because it's been playing non-stop in my own ever since I picked the game up. But I digress. I think pretty much every aspect in terms of gameplay on offer is just about as good as you're going to get from the Lightning Saga. Now, with everything I wanted to touch on pertaining to the core gameplay out of the way, let's get to the world and the story, because there is honestly a lot more emphasis on both of those things this time around, which, I mean, it makes sense, seeing as it is the finale of the entire saga. So, directly opposing the content available of the trilogy, this game's world and story are by far the weakest. It's like not even a competition. They looked at all the confusing jumbled mess that they had created with the previous two games and realized, hey, we need to figure out a way to make it all understandable and come together for the series' ending. But in doing so, made what is probably the most confusing finale to a series I've ever seen. The world that had been brought up and fleshed out through the previous two games, whilst technically still here, is basically completely gone. After the ending of 13.2, where Valhalla and Pulse merged together, the world was completely reshaped, so by, a technicality, we are still on Pulse, but it's like a weird gross amalgamation of Pulse and Valhalla, which is now called the Nova Chrysalia. It's separated into 4 distinct feeling zones, which we'll be covering individually since the story doesn't exactly become linear until the end of the game, as in you can complete every main story in whichever order that you want, and for my sanity, I'm just gonna summarize them in the order that I completed them in, but before we get to summarizing each zone and its stories, we need to get past the game's intro. The game starts with a beautifully rendered cutscene of Lightning crashing Snow's end of the world party that he's holding, but it doesn't have any voice acting, so you just get Lightning and Snow awkwardly talking with each other without any actual voices. It then proceeds to play the exact same cutscene again, but now it actually has the voice acting. Is it gonna play this whole cutscene again, just with voice acting this time? That is gonna be so fucking obnoxious, dude. Anyways, after crashing the banquet, we are interrupted by this little childlike version of Sarah known as Lumina. We chase Snow around his palace for a bit and get the intro to the combat and the basic mechanics and what have you. Snow then barricades himself in a room with this stuff called the Chaos, which is what spawns all the spooky monsters and what was held within Valhalla, and unable to break in, we take off back to the Ark. The Ark, or as we know it, the floating city of Bunavelza, is the hub world. Essentially, the god Bunavelza, to which Hope had named his new cocoon after, used Hope's new cocoon after Valhalla floated forth, and repurposed it to be a place where time does not flow, acting as a safe place for Lightning, his champion, and Hope to make their game plan. Oh yeah, Lightning is also now the sorta puppet champion for the god Bunavelza, as he wants to remake the world since it's, you know, kinda fucked now, but he needs someone to save the souls of the living, which is your job. And to do so, he's holding Sarah hostage and blackmailing us. Hope is also a child again, even though he was an adult when time stopped flowing back at the end of 13.2, which, like, it isn't ever properly explained, so don't expect that to get addressed at all. But that's essentially the setup for the current plot. Hope then explains to us that we have 5 spots on the map where we gotta go investigate, essentially plopping us 5 main quests to choose from. He then beams us down to the first of our 4 major zones to explore, the holy city of Luxarion.
Everything looks shiny in that sun. A day in your life. Close your eyes to find yourself.
So right after we get off the train at Luxarion, we notice a pink-haired lady has been absolutely gutted and just left in the streets. Right after that, a very mediocre recreation of what is supposed to be Lightning is draped from the clock tower with a threatening message that the savior, i.e. Lightning, is going to be murdered by the Hunter in Black, or something along those lines. Of course, we take it upon ourselves to get to the bottom of this murder, where we learn this isn't the first time something like this has happened. It's actually happened 3 times now. We figure someone is obviously trying to bait us out, so we go around looking for clues. We learn that the city is under the protection of the church that follows Bunavelza. However, there is a second fanatical group that follows Etro who are particularly shady. We decide it's worth investigating and tail some of the shady looking fanatics to a graveyard. However, to enter said graveyard, we need a code that is only available to be seen after 6 AM, and this is the most annoying part of the game's entire main quest, by a long shot, because you need to look for 4 specific numbers which are only available after 6 AM, right? However, the game auto-teleports you back to the Ark at 6 AM every day, so you can't just do the first part of the quest and then wait around to do the second part. You have to go to the Ark and come back. Then when you do come back, you realize one of the numbers you need is in a part of the map that is only accessible after 12 AM, meaning you have to wait around and find other things to do for 18 in-game hours. This is what I mean by the time system being an arbitrary way to time lock content and being annoying. This shit right here. Anyways, after you do get the number in the Warrens, you encounter that little girl Lumina again, who shows you an oracle drive of you getting murdered by someone. We are then ambushed by, surprise, it's Noel Christ, who believes he has to kill us to save the future. With the new code, we head back to the graveyard and infiltrate the cultists, who are in the middle of their nightly murdering of a pink-haired damsel in distress. We team up with Noel, who has followed us here, and take out all of the cultists. Noel then implores us to follow him since we need to be at the, quote, right spot for our final confrontation. And where is this right spot, you might be asking? Well, it's the Warrens, of course. You know, the place we were just at, where we had just fought Noel, like, a minute of talking ago? Anyways, we follow him to the Warrens, and wouldn't you know it, he also has an oracle drive of him killing us and saving the future and living happily ever after with Yule and stuff. Of course, we then do battle with Noel and beat him, although afterwards it plays one of those cutscenes where, even though we technically beat him in the battle, he still has the opportunity to kill us for, you know, reasons, I guess, but he ultimately decides not to and stabs the Oracle Drive instead. Yule then appears and promises they'll be together again soon, and we are given Noel's soul and a nice little boost to our stats. And whilst that is technically the end of Luxarion's main story, there's a bit more to it than that. So after we beat up Noel, we are informed that the High Priestess Lady of the Church would like to meet with us, and after doing some menial side quests to grant ourselves midnight access to the cathedral grounds, we get to meet up with Vanille, who is no longer in crystal stasis, having woken up 13 years ago. She tells us her grandmaster plan. She apparently can hear the souls of the dead who are trapped in the chaos that Valhalla brought forth. With Etro being dead, they have nowhere to go, so they're just amassing in the chaos. Vanille is gathering them all within the cathedral and plans to, on the final day, perform a ritual to which all the souls will be saved and will peacefully pass on and, be at peace and shit. And with that little piece of exposition delivered, we are now at the real end of Luxarion's main story. I really like Luxarion. Like, aesthetically, it is probably my favorite of the 4 major zones. It's like a more technologically advanced version of an 1860s London. The church is the main governing body in the entirety of what's left of our world, and they're trying to keep their citizens safe in the final days before the end, but no one's happy. Everyone has lost their will to live ages ago. Everyone's just depressed, and the cherry on top is the secondary fanatical organization that's just going around terrorizing the town with their beliefs that the savior Lightning is evil. There was even a quest where I was searching for a little girl that was being followed throughout the city by these fanatics. You basically had to run from payphone to payphone trying to pinpoint her exact location. Ultimately, she winds up in the Warrens. I wasn't aware of this though, and forgot to finish the quest for a few days, and when I came back, I had failed the quest, and the little girl had been murdered and her body dumped in the streets. That's goddamn brutal. I let her
You a fake gamer?
I let her get murdered by the fanatics because I didn't rescue her quick enough.
You're a fucking fake gamer.
Damn it. There are a bunch of super neat side quests like that. There's one I mentioned earlier where you hear a rumor about ghost sightings around the old graveyard, and you have to run around talking to a number of ghosts, or one where a girl is selling her tears to the depressed residents of Luxarion because they don't have any tears left to shed. In terms of overall memorability, Luxarion sticks out the most with its questing, that's for sure. They have absolutely nailed the vibes they were going for, that of a drab, devoid of joy, kind of gross city overall at the end of their rope, and I love it. And while it may be my favorite aesthetics and tonnage wise, it wasn't actually my favorite to play through. Nah. That honor lay in Yusnon's lap. The only and best way I can think to describe Yusnon is if Nautilus from FF13 had delivered on any of its promises. For the entirety of the time you play as Saz and Vanille starting in Chapter 4 all the way up until you play them again in Chapter 8, you hear non-stop about how Nautilus is the entertainment capital, how people go there to gamble their life away and forget all their problems, how there's chocobos and games and rides and just so much stuff to do there. And then all the way in Chapter 8, like 15 hours of playtime into the game, you arrive, and what do? You watch a pre-rendered cutscene of a parade explaining the war between Cocoon and Pulse, and you check out some chocobos, and then you fight the military. Now excuse me if I'm being a bit too ambitious here, but would it have killed them to have let the player, engage with some mini-games for a bit or something here, or at the very least, made it seem more lively than it was? What I'm trying to say is Nautilus was a fucking disappointment compared to how the characters in the world talked about it. Yusnon, on the other hand, is far from a disappointment. It is a city that is holding a never-ending banquet in celebration of the fact that the world is coming to an end soon and people will actually be able to die properly, and it just feels like it. Everything is so festive. There's chocobo girls dancing in the streets, people performing for crowds eating their dinner. When it comes nighttime, a never-ending rain of fireworks starts going off. There's a coliseum where people fight for the enjoyment and the pleasure of the crowds. Hell, there's even a side quest where Lightning can go on a date with some random-ass lonely middle-aged dude who got stood up by another chick. It just takes all the festivities promised with Nautilus and actually delivers on them. So what is the story for Yusnon then? Well, after we failed to catch Snow in his palace, the city has gone onto high alert, meaning we can't get back into the palace at all and need to find a separate way to enter. We hear a rumor that we can sneak in through an abandoned entrance down by the warehouse district, and so during the night, we haul ourselves out there to sneak in. However, we are stopped by Lumina, who summons a Cyclops to block off our path and prevent us entry. After we deal with that Cyclops, we are dropped into the warehouse district and just so happen to stumble upon a keycard that will grant us access to the palace's courtyard, which is just oh so very convenient. What luck Lightning sure does have, am I right? We of course head to the courtyard, but we need to figure a way to get to the actual palace itself. Hope then cooks up a brilliant idea. Alright, get this. So there's this play that's going to be happening here in a bit, right? And the grand finale is going to be using a bunch of fireworks to add a little spark, a little flare, right? Okay, so all you have to do is first convince the play's manager that he should double or even triple up on the fireworks as to weaken this giant statue that is the centerpiece for the play. Then you need to convince him that you should be playing the leading role instead of the actual actress, right? Okay, you're following so far? Then you need to break the statue after the fireworks have weakened it and ride it like a surfboard over the fence, thus gaining easy access into the palace. Simple is as simple does, to be honest with you. So after we somehow managed to convince the manager to up the number of fireworks and ask to be the main event, he basically says we are astronomical levels of ugly and should go compete in the local coliseum to acquire some new drip worthy of being upon his stage. So we go do just that. After swiftly taking care of an all things considered very lackluster tournament, like I'm talking absolute bottom of the anime tournament arc tier list, we are given our new outfit. We then return to the stage manager and he tells us we look bonita, and we get the cool cutscene of Lightning tearing up the stage and entering the palace. We find Snow has locked himself behind some ice and go searching for a method to get in, quickly snatching up his engagement necklace that he had given to Sarah, which just magically has the power to melt the ice for some reason. So I'm not gonna lie, I kinda wasn't paying attention here at this moment. I was watching a really dope video about the history of the Corpse Party franchise by Thaf9, but the wiki tells me that Snow wants us to kill him as a way to atone for Sarah's death, and absorbs a bunch of chaos he had been hiding in the palace to protect the citizens of Yusnan. We fight him and of course come out victorious and turn him back to his normal sane self by convincing him that Sarah's soul still wants to be with him, and that is where the Yusnan main story ends. Now, Yusnan and Luxarion are pretty much tied when it comes to the quality and memorability in terms of their quests, and whilst I do think Luxarion takes the cake by just a smidge, I did want to at least acknowledge the stories I thought were super neat from Yusnan. For example, the two death game quests. Essentially, Biggs and Wedge are holding a sort of death game show where you enter into the warehouse district and have to kill a set amount of enemies for shits and giggles, which is revealed to actually be a way for people to kill themselves in a thrilling way, since people are so desperate to die in this world. And of course, there's also the aforementioned date quest. Lightning stumbles upon a dude who's hanging out all lonely, and he's like, oh, I got stood up for a date, and Lightning's all like, well, damn, that sucks. And then he's all like, hey, you wanna go on a date together? And then Lightning's like, yeah, sure, haha, wink wink, nudge nudge. And then Hope is like, hey, maybe he actually thinks you wanna go on a date with him. And Lightning responds like, nah, surely not, but you know, it wouldn't hurt to come make sure he doesn't just sit there waiting. And sure enough, he is in fact just sitting there waiting for you, and you get a nice little scene of you two enjoying the fireworks together. Overall, Yusnan is superb to play through. It's oozing personality that Nautilus tried and failed to deliver on, and there are a lot of cute little activities for you to engage in here, like finding all the chocobos and saying their cute little catchphrase, meow meow, choco chow, for which you'll be awarded the only outfit that matters in the entire game, the cat girl, or as more cultured gamers will refer to it, the Mikote outfit. Now I hate to have to do this, but I have to go from my favorite zone I played through to my least favorite zone I played through, and that is none other than the Dead Dunes. The Dead Dunes just sucks. In every sense of the imagination, it has the least amount of side quests available, with only 8 total, although 3 of them can be scratched off of that list, as they're either too time-consuming or too difficult to be doing feasibly on a first-time playthrough, and one of them is just legitimately not a side quest, like you need to complete it for the main quest. On top of that, it's the largest or second largest zone in the game. I'm not exactly sure which is bigger, this or the Wildlands, but it's also the least visually diverse and appealing of all the zones. Not to mention that 75% of your actual playtime is spent spelunking through a god-awful maze underneath the sand that will have you backtracking through the desert to complete stupid fetch quests to open one dumbass door to finish the story. I absolutely despise the Dead Dunes and every idea they tried to cram into this place. None of the quest stories are interesting, the zone itself is ugly and unfun to traverse, it is by far the shortest of all the offerings despite taking up the most landmass. I hate it with a burning passion. So in the Dead Dunes we join a bandit gang called Monoculus, which is being led by Fang. She wants our help to go dungeon diving and find a neat little artifact somewhere in the labyrinth under the desert that Vanille needs to perform her ritual on the final day. Of course we agree to help her because, that's our good old friend Fang. How could we turn her down? We find the door that would lead us to the artifact, which is named the Holy Clavis, but we can't proceed because we need to read 3 murals. But to read these 3 murals, we need to collect 3 tablets, and to collect these 3 tablets, we need to go to 3 different temples. You can see why I despise this place. Anyways, after we collect the 3 tablets and read the 3 murals, we get a bit more insight onto the world. Bonavelza is a classic case of Zeus and Kronos. Basically, he kills his mom, a god named Mwyn. He murdered her in the hopes of taking over full control of the mortal world, but he's a paranoid little shit, so he made a god named Pulse to find the entrance to the unseen world, which is where the dead go. He then made Etro to assist Pulse, but accidentally created her in Mwyn's likeness, so he grants her no powers nor any job, and instead replaces her with a new god, Lindsay. Then he tells Pulse to create the world and tells Lindsay to protect the world, and promptly puts himself into a crystal stasis sleep. Etro gets really depressed over the fact that she is both powerless and purposeless in this world and so resolves to kill herself, to which Lindsay uses her blood to create the human race. Etro then is sent to the Unseen Realm, where she meets Mwyn and is tasked with being the guardian of the dead and protecting the balance between life and death, for if it isn't maintained, the universe itself will collapse in on itself and the world will be destroyed, which is, exactly the scenario we're in right now. So that's a nice little bit of lore that we get there, but, I can't help but feel like it would have been nice to not have saved it until the final game in the series, and I'm sure that bits and pieces of this lore were sprinkled about in one of the million data log entries in the other games, but this is some serious world building that's kind of really important to the story you're trying to tell, and you're just now dropping it on everyone this far into the game? It would have made much more sense to, have learned this sometime during the events of 13.2, in my opinion. I digress though. After we listen to all the murals, the door finally opens and we can go snag the Holy Clavis, and la gasp, what's this? Fang attempts to destroy it. Before we can get an explanation why though, we are ambushed by some of the followers of the church and are forced into a boss fight, after which we realize they stole the Clavis in the commotion. Fang then reveals that the ritual will actually kill Vanille, which I have no damn clue why she didn't just lead with that from the beginning. Because there is a 99.99% chance Lightning would try to find an alternative or convince Vanille to not go through with it. It's not like they are strangers or something, they're practically Lightning's only friends. Lightning then tells Fang to meet her at the church on the final day, and that's the end to the Dead Dune storyline, and honestly, good fucking riddance. I could not be more happy to be done with this place. I hate it so much. From the ugly yellow and brown color scheme that the entire place has, to the bullshit skeleton enemies that spawn right on top of you and make it impossible to avoid battle, there is one saving grace to the entire zone, and it's the optional dungeon that you unlock if you get the extra 14th day and the super boss. Which I'll talk about both of them later in greater detail. For now though, I think it's best we leave behind this God's Forsaken Land and head to the final zone of the game, and the longest of them all by virtue of actually having 2 main story quests, the Wildlands. So for me personally, the Wildlands is just a smidge better than the Dead Dunes by the fact that there's more things to do here and it's not an ugly brown and yellow desert. Though I can't say it's much better on the eyes overall, most of the zone is either a maze-like forest / rocky crags area or different shades of green and yellow plains. Like, if I was to put up side by side the Wildlands and several other grass-like areas in different video games, I imagine you'd be hard-pressed to think they look all too different outside of graphical presentation and individual stylization. Now that doesn't go for the entire zone, as there are 5 distinct, I guess you would call them, districts, and only 3 of the 5 are plains types areas. The other 2 are a forest and a rocky ravine, respectively. None of the quests on offer are super great either. It's a lot of collect X amount of materials and turn them in for a potion to give to someone, or kill X amount of enemies to prove you're a good hunter, you know, stuff like that. Boring kill and collect fetch quests. And best of all, the Wildlands is home to my favorite creature in gaming history, this dog that looks straight out of an N64 game. I mean, look at it in all its triangular glory. So, the first of our 2 stories starts as soon as we set foot off the train in the Wildlands. We get a voice in our head telling us stories about finding the white chocobo and riding it across the chaos to the Temple of Etro. Curious as to what the hell any of that means, we decide to head to the nearest settlement, that being a farm smack dab in the middle of the plains. After we find our way there, some old dude is all like, "Oh, yeah, the white chocobo, I seen that fella before, he probably out in the old ruins being murdered by a chocobo eater or something." So we of course set off to the ruins and do battle with the chocobo eater, which has no relation to the boss of the same name from FF10. After which, the old man from before rolls up and takes the chocobo back to the farm. From here, you have to figure out a way to gather up food items to feed the chocobo in an attempt to get it recovered to full health. This wasn't that difficult, since most of the side quests around the area award you some form of edible to feed the chocobo, and after the little fella's all healed up, you are told to head to the base of the temple where a small civilization has formed full of the followers of Etro. After we head into the temple, we meet Caius, who's still around and kicking, and he blasts our ass all the way down to the bottom and gives us a debuff that constantly drains our health that was pretty much completely pointless. Like, I honestly forgot about it until I was writing the script for this video. Anyways, throughout our travels from the bottom of the temple to the top, we run into a bunch of various Yules, and they inform us that the greater chaos as a whole is actually the fragments of all the dead Yules, and they want us to save Caius' soul so he can go and live in the new world that Bonavelza's crafting up. And after what was, all things considered, one of the hardest boss fights in a game I've had in a while with Caius, that I somehow managed to scrape a first try victory out of, we learn Caius cannot be saved because there are too many Yules with too many conflicting wishes. Some want him to be saved, others want him to stay, thus he is bound to the chaos. We depart the temple being unable to save anyone there, and are informed upon our exit that our little Choco Bro was actually just the reincarnation of our summon Odin the entire time, and Lumina is also there and implies that there's a Yule who doesn't want to be with Caius, obviously meaning the one that wishes to be with Null. So after we finish up with that main quest, we can head off to the secondary quest held within the Wildlands. Tucked away in the corner of one of the plains, there is a crashed airship, and inside said crashed airship, there is a washed up, jaded old man that we all know as Saz. He's down in the dumps and all depressed because his son Dodge fell into a coma and won't wake up, saying that his soul has been split up into a bunch of fragments and he's been looking for like hundreds of years and can't find any of them. We then leave the ship and literally 5 feet from the door, find one of the fragments. Lumina then appears, saying she's going to be watching over to see if we can collect them all. Also, I feel like now is a good time to mention that during all of this, there's a bunch of cutscenes where Lightning talks with Lumina, or a fake version of Sarah in her mind, whenever she returns to the Ark. But because they don't know what order players will choose to complete the game's main story in, they try their best to keep it as vague as possible, while still also barely hinting and nudging at what's to come. But they're so pointless, I've pretty much omitted mentioning them entirely. Things like, "Oh man, Bonavelza stole Sarah's soul from you." Like, yeah, no shit, we already knew that. It was pretty clearly stated at the start of the game that Bonavelza is holding her hostage to have Lightning do his bidding. I just figured that it was worth a tiny mention. The gist of what has been told so far is that Bonavelza stole Sarah's soul from Lightning. She feels a little bit incomplete, like she's missing a part of herself. Lumina has implied that Hope is a puppet and we may not be human, and Lightning says that she will kill Bonavelza if he doesn't uphold his side of the bargain. Anyways, with that out of the way, we can continue our journey to find the rest of Daj's soul. The game just tells you pretty much exactly where to go to find each fragment, which I think is extremely lazy. If they wanted to have an info dump to tell you where they were, they could have at least made it part of that cutscene with Lumina just after finding the first fragment, but I digress. The second fragment is from Chocolina, which is easy enough to retrieve. You just need to complete one of her Canvas of Prayer missions. And Canvas of Prayer is just straight up, imagine a long line of easy and quick to complete side quests that are 90% of the time just fetching items, by far the worst form of optional content available. The third fragment is being held by a soul seed trader. Soul seed traders are vendors who will purchase, well, soul seeds off of you, which I'll talk about in detail later on, so I'm not going to get into what they are or how to obtain them right now. All you need to know is they want you to get some fancy Moogle fragment, which can be obtained from the Moogle village in the woods. Once you're in that village, you will also reconnect with Mog and recruit him to help you out on the final day. The fourth fragment can be found on a cactuar in the desert. I don't have any footage of me gathering this one because I already had it on my person at the time I initiated the quest, having already killed a cactuar during my escapades in the Dead Dunes. And lastly, the fifth and final fragment is being offered up as a prize in Yusnan's Colosseum, which, I don't know about you, seems an awfully strange prize to be offering up to random people like, yes, come compete and win some random kid's soul. After you retrieve all of the soul fragments, Saz does his little ritual, puts on a happy face, and finally Daj wakes the hell up. Honestly, I don't know why it took Saz so long to find a single fragment. I found all 5 within the span of 20 minutes of playtime. Seems to me as if he just didn't want his kid to wake up. The Wildlands overall had my 2 least favorite storylines, healing a chocobo and slowly running through Etro's temple whilst getting exposition dumps from the Yules was insanely boring. And the Saz quest was so simple and pointless, it could have just been an extra step within the first main quest, like while your chocobo was recovering, they have you find Daj's soul fragment, something like that. 60% of the map is your average bare-bones JRPG Plains area, and the other 40% is an annoyingly confusing maze with doors that for some reason they thought would be funny if they were time-gated for certain hours of the day, and a ravine that you can't properly navigate until your chocobo is fully healed, and even then, it's even more confusing than the forest. None of the side quests are particularly intriguing either, despite the Wildlands having the most out of all of the zones. They for some reason even reused the same fucking herd the sheep quest format 3 times, which is just so stupid. Surely they could have thought of something better than that, right? The only reason I enjoyed the Wildlands more than I did the Dead Dunes was purely on the fact it was not nearly as annoying to navigate, it looks more visually diverse and eye-appealing even if it is mostly just generic plains, and the enemies were so much easier to avoid if I didn't want to fight them. Now with all the individual zone storylines and my thoughts on them being summarized, let's get to the finale. So right before the final day, we get a few more cutscenes with Lumina, and she just gives us more confusing exposition about not trusting our friends, not being whole, missing a part of ourselves that we don't even realize, thus we aren't able to save anyone, not even Sarah. It's just a lot of confusing word vomit, to be honest. And after that, we get to meet with Cid Raines, who is for some reason the embodiment of the chaos as a whole, and I say for some reason despite knowing that reason is 100% to save on the budget of creating a new character model. Basically, Cid tells us that actually the ritual Vanille is going to perform at the behest of Bonavelza will erase all the dead people from existence, as Big Boy Bunny sees them as impurities, and informs us Vanille can actually do the opposite and save all their souls. Since we, I guess, cannot now, we can't get rid of the chaos because it's what human hearts are made of, but we can save the souls of those trapped inside. When someone dies, they hang out in the chaos until they're reborn, Sarah included, meaning if Vanille does her ritual, Sarah dies. So we head to the cathedral in Luxarion and fight our way through, eventually teaming up with Fang to get Vanille to stop. Snow crashes the party to stop the ritual, then Vanille begins to save the souls of the damned, and I guess Fang just magically has the ability to do so as well because she helps Vanille despite the Chaos version of Raines never mentioning Fang ever, which is odd, but whatever. And after that is done, the bells begin to toll, marking the end of the beginning, and oh no, what's this? Lay gasp! What a shocker, Hope was actually Bunavelza this whole time. He takes all our companions hostage and beckons us follow him into his dimension so he can finish up creating the new world, and of course, we do so. Bunavelza explains his new plan to Lightning, that being he wants her to take Etro's place as the new god of death, and keep the balance between the unseen realm and the living world. Lightning politely declines by beating the shit out of Bunavelza, because she wants a world not ruled by gods, in which humans can decide their own fates. Alright, so I'm not gonna lie, I seriously do not understand what is happening in this ending, but I will try my absolute best to make it sound comprehensive. So Lightning's plan originally was to plunge both her and Bunny into the unseen realm, but the fake version of Sarah he had created to keep her complacent goads her on to find the real version of Sarah. When Big Boy Bunny stole Sarah's soul, he also created Lumina because Lightning had some feelings she kept to herself or something. I'm not exactly sure, but Lumina merges back in with Lightning, which frees Sarah's soul and makes Lightning whole again. She then also saves Hope, who Bunavelza had taken hostage, and then joined together with everyone from the last few games' main cast, use the power of friendship and give Bunavelza the good old-fashioned team attack, turning him to crystal and freeing all the trapped souls, leaving Nova Chrysalia a darkened wasteland. Caius and Yule then appear, stating they will become the new gods of the Unseen Realm and keep the cycle of death and rebirth going so that people in the new world will actually be able to die. Noel isn't happy with that and gets all fussy. Caius then does a good thing for once in his life and lets the Yule that wishes to be with Noel go with us all to the new world, releasing her from her fate as a Cirrus, after which the universe gets fucking deleted and the remaining 11 people, that of course being the cast of characters, are left surrounding a crystal. After we touch the crystal, we initiate the Big Bang and the crystal farts out a new universe. We all then turn into some pixie fairy dust and reincarnate onto a very Earth-looking planet. The game ends with Lightning dressed up in some casual wear stepping off a train saying she's about to go meet some old friend. Editor's note here, hello. The footage you see for the final cutscene was taken from YouTube by Yick17 Studio. I actually died on the final phase of Bunavelza on my first attempt at the boss fight and took a nap before retrying, and then I, kind of forgot to hit the record button like a dumbass, and I didn't want to go back and fight him a third time just to record the final cutscene, so, thank you to Yick17 for the footage that I stole here. Go check them out on YouTube. So what do I think of the story and its ending? It's fucking ass. It is so bad. The other games weren't exactly high art in terms of their storytelling, but they at least made sense most of the time as individual pieces of narratives, when you weren't looking at them as all being a part of a, one overarching story. Lightning Returns doesn't have that courtesy, because the entire purpose of its story is to act as a conclusion to the plots that they had been building up from the previous two entries. Without those games, this game's plot does not exist, and to an extent, 13.2 suffers from the same problems, but you can go into 13.2 and not really have known anything about the events in 13, and probably still have been fine, because the game essentially recaps for you. Lightning Returns, nuh-uh. It assumes you know the events of all the prior games and have the lore of the world down pretty good, in all the wrong ways. It is just so jumbled, so confusing, so baffling, so nonsensical and absurd. You know it's bad when one of your game's trailers is a legitimate 8-minute long 16-bit recap of the previous two games' stories. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's really cool as a trailer concept, but also, what game needs to recap its story for 8 minutes as a trailer? I just think that it is the weakest story out of all of them that has some really weird ham-fisted plot points that just don't really make sense if you sit down to think about it for more than 2 seconds. Like, according to the wiki, you save Noel's soul early on in the game, but then later down the line, you apparently can't save anyone's souls because you aren't complete? So I guess we didn't actually save Noel's soul? Contradictory story elements that make no sense like this are littered everywhere in this game, and it brings down the story immensely. It is just really bad. Even when in comparison to the already lackluster rest of the trilogy, It's bad enough that I kind of felt robbed by the end of it of an actual satisfying conclusion. Now for my final 2 sections, I felt like talking about some aspects of the game I either liked or didn't like that I didn't want to ramble about too long in their respective sections of the video, but still wanted to mention, so I'm making a section dedicated entirely to my nitpicks and small joys. Something the game does that I enjoy a lot is rewarding players who actually feel like doing a lot of the content offered. For example, if you do enough quests and feed the biblically accurate tree enough Aradia, you'll actually unlock an extra day at the end of the game. And with this extra day, you will also unlock a new secret dungeon in the Dead Dunes. It is essentially a boss rush of the last ones, which is another system in place that I like a lot. Essentially, the last ones are, well, the last of their species. If you farm a specific enemy too often, you'll put them in a state of extinction, in which the last one of that species can spawn. If you choose to kill it, then that enemy is wiped from your game for the rest of your playthrough, meaning that you will not encounter that specific enemy anymore throughout the rest of your time playing, until you either start a new game or enter a new game plus. It's really neat. I think it's a super cool concept, and the final dungeon is essentially just 30 some odd rooms packed with every single last one that you could possibly encounter. Of course, if you do choose to kill them, you will be rewarded with some of the best accessories and weapons in the game, but they won't be a walk in the park, so you better be prepared. And speaking of optional final dungeons, within the game's actual final dungeon, right before the room where you go to fight Bunavelza, you have the option to take the final trial. Essentially just 4 straight corridors you go through to activate some lever, and at the end of it, you'll be rewarded with the Ultima Blade, the strongest weapon that you can get. I think, don't quote me on that. I also mentioned earlier that I would talk about the Chaos and Soul Seeds, so let me give you the quick rundown on how it works. Basically, there's Chaos expansions that can pop up around any of the maps. Inside, enemies will spawn more frequently, and those enemies will have buffs such as higher damage and regenerative health. To get rid of it, you just gotta deal with the enemies. And of course, to go along with this, another thing that spawns inside of these Chaos Wells are these things called Soul Seeds. Now, as far as I'm aware, they serve no other purpose outside of being something you can trade in to a Soul Seed trader. It's essentially just a way to get easy gil. It's a neat concept and offers a more challenging battle when compared to the rest of the game, which is for the most part fairly straightforward and easy. The music is, of course, on point once again. I mean, did you expect anything less? Everyone who has worked on the soundtracks for the entire saga has been killing it the entire time. From the funky jazz tunes that play in Yusnan during the night when everyone's out to celebrate, to the absolute god-tier piece that is Almighty Bunavelza. Oh my god, people, when I tell you this might be my favorite final boss theme in any game ever, you best believe I mean it. The level of freedom that the game allows you is superb, and I mean in almost every aspect of the game, not just the customizability allowed when it comes to your build and outfits. The fact that you can choose which main story you want to complete and what order you want to complete them, or hell, even just not complete them at all and get the quote bad ending, it's nice. So much better than the previous 2 games. I do believe, though, that's every smaller system or mechanic of the game that I enjoy that I felt worth at least a mention. So let's go on ahead and talk about some of my nitpicks. Alright, so not wasting any time, the performance. Square Enix still somehow could not manage to get the game running on a computer without stuttering and crashing. I mean, sure, it was much better than 13.2, not even remotely as buggy, but I mean, come on. Being better than 13.2 is an extremely low bar to clear. Like, seriously, it just baffles me how bad Square seems to mess up their PC ports. And to go in hand with that, the control layouts and support is abysmal. You can't even use your mouse. There is literally 0 mouse support for Lightning Returns, when there was full mouse support for the previous 2 entries, which forced me to use my only controller on hand, my PS4 controller, which of course brought with it its own slew of issues, because the key mappings were abysmal, making it so I could not for the life of me switch my Garb in combat without wasting EP that I would want to be using elsewhere. Also, the game is just, I mean, there's no nice way to put this, it's kinda ugly. It released late 2013 in Japan and early 2014 worldwide, and when you stick it up and compare it to some of the other games that came out around that time frame, well, I mean, it just doesn't hold up. The graphics are dated by this point. I mean, do I need to bring up the damn dog again? Just look at his derpy ass face. And also, the god-awful use of 13 in the story. Oh my god. I get that it is the trilogy of the 13th game in the mainline series, but holy shit, does the number 13 have to be used for everything? They constantly say we have 13 days till the end. Vanille and Fang woke up 13 years ago. For God's sake, they even have this plotline about how we used to have 26 hours per day, but the mythical 13th hour before midday has disappeared. I absolutely hate the ham-fisting of the number 13. I also felt it was probably worth mentioning that the localization team, according to many sources, did a really piss-poor job, like so bad that a lot of the story was changed entirely during the translation from Japanese to English. So if you want the story in its intended form, there are countless resources online that will detail the differences between the JP script and the English script. I'll try and leave a few below in the description for you to check out if you want, but I think that's really all the small nitpicks from me personally. Most of my major gripes I had with the world or combat or story were already talked about in their respective sections, so I do think it's time to just take it to the finish line and give my ultimate thoughts on the series and finally answer the question I've had looming this entire time. Do I think that Lightning Returns is a bad game? Well, not entirely. I think there's good and bad aspects to the game. The worst aspect for me personally has gotta be the disappointing story, and the high note is probably the player freedom, but everyone is sure to find things they enjoy and dislike on their own. I will say, as an overall package, I think Lightning Returns was the best offering they had from the saga. I enjoyed it the most, and found myself playing for hours at a time, going all the way till the sun was rising even. It is now like 7:30 a.m. and the sun is finally rising. I've been playing since 6 a.m. yesterday. But I can see why people might not enjoy this game compared to the others, because it is fundamentally a lot different. The other 2 entries are more traditional style Final Fantasy games. They are linear, you have your party of 3, you have set class roles. It's a lot more familiar than Lightning Returns might be. So it's up to you which you enjoy the best of the 3 games. As for the series as a whole, I'll be blunt. The criticisms are fair, 100%. I don't think it's even a question on whether or not they deserve their criticism, because the games are very clearly not the best on offer from Square Enix. I had a comment on my first video covering Final Fantasy XIII that was along the lines of, your criticisms and opinions are the same as the reviews from 10 years ago. You should watch some recent reviews and change your mind. And the thing is, that comment wasn't wrong, it's true. They are very similar to some of the criticisms from a decade ago, because the games aren't actively receiving updates or reworks or changes. They're single-player story-driven JRPGs. They're pretty much the exact same games today as they were on release, and they will still be this way 10 years, 20 years, 30 years from now, which means the criticisms won't be outdated or unfair, unless Square Enix, for some reason, decides to come and change up the game or release a remaster with fixes or a remake or something, which I guarantee they will probably never do. It's fine if you think the games are good or enjoyable, but you have to admit that there are other JRPGs out there that are just plain flat out better. But just because they are better doesn't mean that those games have to be your favorites. Star Ocean 3 is my favorite JRPG of all time, but I can admit it's probably nowhere near approaching the greatest out there. Off the top of my head, I can think of several that are better. Final Fantasy IX, Legend of Dragoon, Tales of Arise, Xenoblade Chronicles. It's completely fine to have differing opinions from the masses, and I love hearing why people enjoy certain games that others might not. The Lightning Saga isn't bad, it's not great, it's just average, and there's nothing wrong with that, because they are still enjoyable games, even with their perceived flaws. So yes, after all this time I spent playing the games, writing these reviews, and editing these videos, I think the criticisms are fair, but to go along with that, the games are just straight up fun more often than not. They're average games with some poor design at times, some really unlikable and bad characters, and a story so confusing it makes Neon Genesis Evangelion look like the least complex piece of media ever created, but they're still fun. This has been a really fun series to make. I do still want to go back and kinda maybe tidy up my review on FF13 since it was mostly just summarizing the story and not focusing too much on the aspects I actually disliked or liked, but I need a break from the Lightning Saga for now. I want to stick with this kind of formula, so if you've made it this far, might as well subscribe and drop a like first of all, and secondly, comment below what series you'd like to see me cover. I was thinking maybe Darksiders or Dragon Age, but I'd love to hear what you guys want to see. That's all I have for you though. Thank you for watching, I'll catch you next time. Good night.